Chapter 907. Impudent. Mo Jingli's face darkened. He slammed his hand heavily on the armrest. The heavy sound made everyone's heart tremble. Zhang Baiwan's plump body trembled. His face was ashen from fright. I gave you face and you didn't want it. Do you really think I am a pushover? Mo Jingli said darkly. He waved his hand, drag him out for I and flog him 50 times. I believe that Lord Zhang's body will recover very quickly. 50 flogs. If he really flogged someone like Zhang Baiwan who didn't know martial arts and wasn't young, it would be enough for him to be buried. Even if the Li Palace was merciful, his life would most likely be cut by 70 to 80%. It was obvious that the Li Palace was planning to swallow the entire Zhang family. Everyone's heart trembled. They couldn't help but feel lucky that they didn't do anything stupid. The guards at the side didn't allow Zhang Baiwan to beg for mercy. They directly punished him and dragged him out. Not long after, the heavy sound of flogging and Zhang Baiwan's cries of pain came from outside the door. It was obvious that Mo Jingli wanted to kill the chicken to warn the monkeys. Prince Regent. Just as everyone was trembling in fear and struggling, a clear and low voice sounded in the hall. Everyone looked towards the source of the voice. They saw a young master dressed in white standing up. He said calmly, "The prince is about to go to war. There is no need to lower yourself to the level of an ignorant commoner. I ask the prince to reconsider." Mo Jingli raised an eyebrow. He looked at Yili with an indecipherable expression and said, "Young Master Chu wants to plead for mercy for him?" Yili smiled and said, "This one is not pleading for Lord Zhang. It's just that, the prince's northern expedition is for the foundation of the Dechu state. If Zhang Baiwan is killed, I'm afraid it will affect the prince's reputation." Interesting. Mo Jingli's actions were meant to intimidate the crowd. He had no intention of taking Zhang Baiwan's life. At least, he had to keep him alive so that he could leave the Prince Regent's mansion. Hearing Yi Li's words, Mo Jingli raised his hand to signal the people around him to call for a halt. Not long after, Zhang Baiwan was dragged back and thrown to the ground. Although Yi Li begged for mercy, she still received more than 20 beatings. Her clothes were soaked with blood. Mo Jingli looked coldly at the person sprawled on the ground, unable to get up. He said to Yi Li, "My northern expedition was originally to recover the lost land of Dechu state. Now, I am only borrowing money from the people in the name of the court. This Zhang Baiwan has repeatedly refused. Does young Master Chu think that such a person should not be beaten?" Yi Li said indifferently, "Such a person naturally deserves to be beaten. However, killing without teaching is called abuse, and not abstinence is called violence. Everyone knows that Lord Zhang loves money as much as his life. It is inevitable that he would be muddle-headed for a moment. Now that he has learned his lesson, I believe that Lord Zhang will not disappoint the prince again." "Is that so?" Mo Jingli raised his eyebrows as he looked at Zhang Baiwan. Zhang Baiwan was able to accumulate tens of thousands of assets. He was definitely not an idiot. How could he not know that he had almost lost his life just now? If it wasn't for young Master Chu's pleading, Zhang Baiwan would have become a dead man. When he saw Mo Jingli's gaze sweep over, he nodded and said, "Young Master Chu is right. This humble one was muddle-headed. I beg the prince's forgiveness. This humble one is willing to donate 500,000 dan of grain to the army. The army was given for free. There was no need to return it." Although Mo Jingli had never planned on returning it, it sounded better than borrowing it. However, 500,000 dan of grain sounded like a lot. However, it was not even enough to feed hundreds of thousands of soldiers for a month. Naturally, Mo Jingli would not be satisfied. Zhang Baiwan's heart trembled. He said with a sullen face, 1 million dan." Mo Jingli snorted and said with a smile, "If that's the case, I still have to thank Lord Zhang for his righteous actions. In addition, I'm afraid that I will have to trouble Lord Zhang to gather the grain for the army later on. Of course, the imperial court will pay a high price for it. How about it? What else could Zhang Baiwan do other than nod? He naturally knew that Imo Jingli's so-called high price was not something that he could hope for. Even if it was a fair price, he would not be able to get it. In the end, he would still have to pay for it. He was only afraid that after Prince Li finished the war, the Zhang family would still have some money left. With Zhang Baiwan's lesson, the wealthy merchants present were naturally more tactful. There was no need for Imo Jingli to say anything. They all began to donate money and goods. Most of them were even gifts. Although these people were probably cursing Imo Jingli's 8 generations of ancestors in their hearts, on the surface, they still had to carefully smile. They were afraid that if Imo Jingli was angered, it would be difficult for them to even walk out of the Li Palace alive. After a while, Yi Li did a rough calculation in her heart. The people present had been forced to donate 5 to 6 million taels of silver. There were also countless other things. With such a rich income, Imo Jingli's gloomy face became much better. Yi Li also very tactfully donated 50,000 taels of silver. Although Imo Jingli was slightly dissatisfied, he also thought that Chu Junwei was away from home. 50,000 taels of silver was already a lot of face. Moreover, Chu Junwei's words just now could be considered as giving Imo Jingli a way out. This caused Imo Jingli to have a good impression of him. Thus, he did not say anything else. Of course, this 50,000 taels of silver was given by Master Lin, who was sitting next to Yi Li. Master Lin had lost 450,000 taels of silver in one banquet. His heart ached so much that his face was about to turn green. Everyone present knew that this money was like throwing meat buns at a dog. It was gone forever. Fortunately, Jiangnan had always been a land of wealth. Although these wealthy merchants had lost a lot, they could still bear it. If it was Nanzhao or Xiling, these people would have rebelled without waiting for Imo Jingli's northern expedition. After getting what he wanted, Imo Jingli was no longer in the mood to drink and eat with these people. After toasting a cup of wine, he stood up and left. Everyone present actually had a stomachache from eating, but no one dared to immediately stand up and leave. Prince Li had just left and you were already leaving. Weren't you clearly dissatisfied with Prince Li? Since ancient times, the idea that the poor should not fight with the rich, and the rich should not fight with the officials had long been deeply ingrained in people's bones. As long as it was not that they could not survive, ordinary commoners would not easily be willing to become enemies with the imperial court. Thus, everyone absent-mindedly looked at the singing and dancing in front of them while silently vomiting blood for the wealth they had lost. The most relaxed person present was probably Yi Li. Although Imo Jingli had left, Yi Ying and the little emperor remained at the banquet. After all, it was the regent's residence's banquet. It could not be without a host. However, Yi Li's current attire was not suitable for her to talk to Yi Ying. Her gaze calmly swept past Yi Li, who was sitting in a daze in his chair. A faint smile appeared on Yi Li's lips. Why did the emperor appear at the regent's residence today? Yi Li asked curiously. Master Lin hurriedly explained in a low voice, I heard that the regent and the Empress Dowager had a falling out. He said that the Empress Dowager was soft-hearted and did not know how to teach the emperor. He planned to bring the emperor with him and teach him personally. Teach him personally? Imo Jingli was actually planning to scare the little emperor to death. Furthermore, the Empress Dowager was soft-hearted. Imo Jingli had probably forgotten that he was also taught by that soft-hearted woman. Chapter 908. That's right. Sigh. It's not easy to be born in the royal family. Old Master Lin looked at the dazed little emperor and shook his head. Even a fool could see that the little emperor was simply a puppet that could not be supported. When he faced Prince Li, he was frightened like a cicada in winter. Prince Li probably did not treat the little emperor well. It was better if he stayed in the royal palace with the Empress Dowager and Empress Dowager watching over him. Now that he was in the princely manor, who knew how long he could live? Yi Li lowered her head and thought for a while. She looked at Wei Lin behind her. Wei Lin went forward and bowed. Yi Li whispered a few words in Wei Lin's ear. Wei Lin nodded silently and returned to his original position. Old Master Lin looked curiously at the two guards behind Yi Li. He felt that this young Master Chu was more and more mysterious. Young Master Chu, Zhang Baiwan, who had just been beaten, came over with a pale face. He smiled and said, "Thank you, young Master Chu, for putting in a good word for me in front of the regent." Because Zhang Baiwan had just offended Mo Jingli, no one dared to say anything to him. And Zhang Baiwan did not have a good relationship with others. Otherwise, even if he was confused at that time, someone would have reminded him. Zhang Baiwan was most likely used as a pawn by these people. But the banquet was not over yet. Zhang Baiwan, who was injured, did not dare to leave. He sat alone in a corner and looked very miserable. At this time, he reluctantly came forward to thank Yi Li. Yi Li smiled and nodded, "Lord Zhang, you don't have to be so polite. It was just a small matter." Zhang Baiwan smiled bitterly and said, "Young master's efforts saved this old man's life. In the future, if young Master Chu needs anything, I will not refuse." Yi Li snickered. This Zhang Baiwan wasn't really muddle-headed. However, she didn't take his last sentence seriously. With Zhang Baiwan's money-loving personality, he wouldn't suddenly change just because of a beating. "I wouldn't dare. Lord Zhang, you don't have to be so polite." Zhang Baiwan looked at Lord Lin beside him and said with a smile, "If young Master Chu has the time, this old man will prepare a small banquet for young Master Chu." Yi Li pondered for a moment and said with a smile, "If that's the case, I'll have to trouble Lord Zhang then." Seeing that Yi Li had agreed, Zhang Baiwan happily returned to his seat. Old Master Lin looked at Zhang Baiwan and couldn't help but laugh. "I didn't expect this Zhang Baiwan to be so generous after being beaten up. I'm afraid that after so many years, young Master Chu is the first person who is fortunate enough to be treated by him willingly." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Mr. Lin is joking." Old Master Lin shook his head and said, "This Zhang Baiwan has never done anything without benefits. Young Master Chu should be careful." Yi Li nodded and thanked Old Master Lin for his reminder. Although Old Master Lin also had some other thoughts, he reminded her with good intentions in the end. In this world, there was no kindness without a reason. Zhang Baiwan was also considered a celebrity in Nanjing. Yi Li naturally had some understanding of him. It was true that he was grateful to her for saving his life, but she was afraid that he was more interested in the Chu family. Old Master Lin thought for a moment and looked at Yi Li with a smile. He whispered with a smile, "I heard that Zhang Baiwan seems to have a young lady waiting to be betrothed." Although he didn't say the rest of the words, Yi Li already understood his meaning. In fact, after seeing Yi Li today, there were many people who had such thoughts. After all, although Chu Junwei was only a side branch of the Chu family, his background was not something that merchants like them, who were looked down upon by others, could compare to. Moreover, this young Master Chu was handsome and elegant. Even King Li seemed to treat this young master with respect. Needless to say, the Chu family and the Su family were inextricably linked in countless ways. Such a good son-in-law was naturally the object of everyone's desire. Even Old Master Lin himself had such thoughts. It was a pity that he had two daughters. His elder daughter had already married a few years ago, while his younger daughter was not even 10 years old. He could only sigh and wring his wrists. Hearing Old Master Lin's words, Yi Li couldn't help but be stunned and speechless. She really hadn't thought about this problem. After all, no matter how much she pretended to be a man, she was still a woman. No woman would think that someone would want to marry their daughter to her. But now, hearing Old Master Lin's words, Yi Li turned to look at Zhuo Jing and Wei Lin. The two of them also had strange expressions. After a while, Wei Lin slowly said, "Gongzi's style is outstanding, and his handsomeness is matchless. Naturally, he is the object of admiration of many parents." So Wang Yi not only had to guard against men, but also against women? Wei Lin and Zhuo Jing couldn't help but secretly sympathize with their prince. Yi Li shook her head helplessly and said with a smile, "Thank you for your reminder, Old Master Lin. This one understands." Old Master Lin chuckled. He covered his mouth and said in a low voice, "This one was just saying something for nothing. Originally, I said that I would rather tear down a temple than ruin a marriage. However, this daughter of Zhang Baiwan. Hee hee. Young master, please reconsider." In the opposite corner, Zhang Baiwan obviously noticed that Old Master Lin might be talking about his family. He glared at him fiercely. Old Master Lin didn't mind and continued to drink his wine. Yili shook her head helplessly and raised her wine cup to Zhang Baiwan. Everyone present was surprised to see this. They didn't expect young Master Chu to see the stingy and miserly Zhang Baiwan in a different light. Chapter 909. On the morning of the second day, Yili received an invitation from the Zhangfu as expected. An invitation for Master Chu Junwei to attend a banquet in the afternoon. Seeing the plain invitation, Yili couldn't help but shake her head and laugh inside. This Zhang Baiwan was really cunning. It hadn't even been a day and he probably hadn't even recovered from the wounds inflicted by Mo Jingli's people. Is Master going to attend the banquet? Wei Lin asked curiously. Yili put down the invitation and said with a smile, "Of course I'm going. Didn't you hear Master Lin say? This is the first time Zhang Baiwan has taken the initiative to invite. How can we not give face?" Wei Lin was non-committal. In any case, if Wang Fei was going, they just needed to follow and protect her. With Zhang Baiwan's abilities, he couldn't pose any danger to Wang Fei. Even if Zhang Baiwan really wanted to marry his daughter to Wang Fei, cough cough, Wang Fei couldn't marry him. "Master, Shiyard has woken up." As she spoke, the servant girl taking care of Princess Xixia came to report. Wei Lin said with slight shock, "She's very lucky, she actually managed to survive." It wasn't that Wei Lin disliked Princess Xixia and wanted her to die, but Princess Xixia's wounds really weren't light. The external wounds weren't fatal, but after the wounds became infected, Princess Xixia developed a high fever and didn't wake up. So many days had passed. Even the doctors in the Fu had given up. They could only take care of her since she hadn't died. Unexpectedly, when everyone had given up, she had woken up. The servant girl said with a strange expression, "But, that girl seems a bit strange." "Strange? What is it? Is she stupid, crazy, or has she lost her memories?" Wei Lin asked. The servant girl shook her head and said with a slight nod, "She's stupid. No, she probably has lost her memories." Yili stood and said, "Let's go take a look." When they came to Shiyard, they heard sobbing before they entered. However, the sobbing didn't sound like Princess Xixia's sobbing. Mainly, with Princess Xixia's age and personality, she definitely wouldn't cry so loudly. When they stepped in, they saw the mess in the room. Yili stood at the door and frowned as she looked at the woman hiding at the foot of the bed. Her eyes were clear and bright. She definitely didn't have the eyes of a lunatic or a fool. However, the expression on his face was indeed a little strange. Seeing them come in, the woman who was hiding at the foot of the bed and crying immediately stopped and stared at them vigilantly. Yili tried calling out, "Princess Xixia, are you feeling better?" Princess Xixia pursed her lips and suddenly threw herself at Yili. "Young master, be careful." Wei Lin was shocked, and he kicked the person who was pouncing over. "Wei Lin, don't!" Yili hurriedly cried out. Wei Lin was taken aback and hurriedly withdrew some of his strength. However, he still sent Princess Xixia flying with a kick. But because he had held back 80 to 90% of his strength, he didn't fall too hard. Princess Xixia clearly didn't expect to be sent flying with a kick. She sat on the ground in a daze for a while before suddenly bursting into tears. "Woo woo. Royal sister, bad people bullied Xia," Wei Lin stilled. He turned back to look at Yili and said, "So she really is dumb. With Princess Xixia's personality, how could she act like this in front of outsiders?" She really sat on the ground and started crying. Yili looked down and said, "I feel that there is a difference between this and being dumb. Xixia, do you recognize me?" Shi Xia was too focused on crying. When she heard Yi Li's words, she hiccuped and looked dazedly at Yi Li. She suddenly reached out to grab Yi Li's face. "Brother, you are so beautiful." Yi Li raised his fan to block her hand. He looked at her with a smile and said, "Does Shi Xia recognize brother?" Princess Shi Xia blinked in puzzlement. She bit her lip and shook her head. "Who are you?" "I am the princess of Nanzhao. You are not allowed to bully me. I want to find my royal sister." "Do you still remember your royal sister's name?" Yi Li asked. Princess Shi Xia rolled her eyes and gave her an expression that said you were dumb. She said proudly, "Of course my royal sister is Princess Anqi of Nanzhao. My royal sister is very powerful. If you dare to bully my royal sister, she will definitely have people beat you." Yi Li couldn't help but lower her head and laugh. "I am good friends with your royal sister. But, how come I don't know that she has a younger sister?" "Nonsense. All of Nanzhao knows that this princess is Princess Shi Xia." Princess Shi Xia glared angrily. Yi Li nodded and said, "All right, but I am not from Nanzhao. If you really are Princess Shi Xia, I will send you back to see Princess Anqi. How old is Princess Shi Xia this year? Why are you here?" Princess Shi Xia grabbed her hair and said with some distress, 7 years old. I don't know. My royal sister said that she would celebrate my birthday, woo woo." Thinking of something, Princess Shi Xia pouted and looked like she was about to cry again. Yi Li thought and asked, "Does Shi Xia know Mo Jingli and Dongfang Yu?" "Then who is it?" Princess Shi Xia asked without much interest. "Brother, are you going to send me home? I will have royal father and royal sister reward you heavily." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "It doesn't matter who it is. Shi Xia, rest well first. When you are better, I will send you back." She pointed at the wounds on her body. Although they had healed a lot these days, they still hurt. Reminded by Yi Li, Princess Shi Xia looked at the wounds on her body and wanted to cry again. After coaxing her with great difficulty, Yi Li let out a sigh of relief and took Wei Lin out. Wei Lin said with some confusion, "What is going on with this Princess Shi Xia? Is she pretending?" Yi Li shook her head and said, "Princess Shi Xia's brain can't make such a perfect disguise. Just now, when I asked her if she knew Mo Jingli and Dongfang Yu, her eyes didn't change at all. If she is pretending, Princess Shi Xia is too good at acting." "That's true." Princess Shi Xia had almost died at the hands of Dongfang Yu. She absolutely hated Dongfang Yu to the bone. Even if she was good at acting, it was impossible to not have any feelings. "Send someone to watch over her. When we leave Jiangnan, send someone to send her back to Nanzhao," Yi Li said. "Yes." Wei Lin nodded and said, "Young master, it's time to go to the Zhang mansion for the banquet." They had wasted a lot of time at Princess Shi Xia's place. In the blink of an eye, it was already afternoon. Yi Li had to change her clothes and go out for the banquet. Zhang Baiwan really deserved the reputation of being the stingiest in Nanjing. The entire Zhang mansion looked simple and unadorned. Even the inside of the mansion was ordinary. If people didn't know, they would never think that this was the mansion of one of the richest merchants in Nanjing. The servants in the mansion were also like kittens. Looking at the housekeeper who was leading the way wearing old clothes with patches, Yi Li couldn't help but twitch her lips. Probably because Yi Li's expression was too explicit, the housekeeper embarrassedly pulled at his clothes and whispered, "Young master, you must be joking. In fact, we are usually not so rude. It's just that yesterday master, to prevent master from feeling uncomfortable, so." Chapter 9-10. Yi Li suddenly understood. It turned out that Zhang Baiwan had lost a lot of money yesterday. The servants in the residence were afraid that they would be an eyesore to the master, so they specially found these clothes to wear, so as not to make the master unhappy. Yi Li smiled and said, "This one was rude. Being thrifty is always a good thing." The housekeeper smiled helplessly. Being thrifty was naturally a good thing, but with the Zhang family's wealth and status in Nanjing, they were often ridiculed because of this. They had long been used to it. Zhang Baiwan had already been waiting in the hall with his wife and daughter. Looking at Madame Zhang and young Miss Zhang, Yili suddenly had a deeper understanding of Zhang Baiwan's stinginess. Because of his injury, Zhang Baiwan's face was still a little pale, but when he saw Yili come in, his face was full of smiles and was very attentive. "Young Master Chu has come. This old one did not come out to welcome you. Please forgive me." Yili cupped her hands and smiled. "Lord Zhang is too polite. This one is Chu Junwei. Greetings to Madam and young Miss Zhang." Zhang Baiwan was very happy and said to his daughter, "Zhu, quickly greet young Master Chu." Young Miss Zhang very shyly stepped forward and bowed. "Zhu, greets young Master Chu." When she saw young Miss Zhang, Yili finally understood why Master Lin had a strange expression when he mentioned Zhang Baiwan's daughter. In all fairness, young Miss Zhang's appearance was not ugly. Although she could not be considered a stunning beauty, she should be a delicate and pretty woman. However, this young lady gave off a very strange feeling. Even someone as calm as Yili couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat when she stared at her. Yili's eyes twitched and she inadvertently took a step back. "Young Miss Zhang is too polite." Then she turned her gaze to Zhang Baiwan, swearing not to look at young Miss Zhang again. Seeing that Yili wasn't looking at her, Miss Zhang's eyes reddened. Zhang Baiwan looked at Yili, then at his daughter. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He smiled at Yili and said, "Young Master Chu, why don't we take a seat first?" Yili smiled and said, "Lord Zhang, please." Because only Yili was invited, Lord Zhang brought Mrs. Zhang and Miss Zhang to the table. The banquet wasn't very sumptuous, but it wasn't disrespectful. It seemed that even though Lord Zhang was stingy, he was still aware of the situation. After Yili sat down, Miss Zhang happened to sit beside her. This made Yili's body stiffen again. "Young Master Chu, Zhu, will pour some wine for you." Miss Zhang picked up the wine jug and eagerly poured some wine for Yili. Yili could only thank her. She sighed and went straight to the point with Lord Zhang. If Lord Zhang really said that he was planning to marry his daughter to her, it would be ugly. "Lord Zhang, actually, this one is here today because I have some important matters to discuss with Lord Zhang." Lord Zhang was taken aback. He smiled and said, "What is it? Why don't we talk after the meal?" Yili said calmly, "If it's about the 1 million grains that Lord Zhang donated to Prince Li yesterday." Zhang Baiwan's face immediately darkened. Just thinking about that 1 million grains made his heart bleed. What does young Master Chu want to talk about? Zhang Baiwan looked at Yili in confusion. Yili asked with a smile, "Is it convenient to talk here?" Zhang Baiwan hesitated for a moment. In the end, he still looked at his wife and daughter and said, "Madam, please bring Zhu down first. I have something to discuss with young Master Chu." Madame Zhang was just an ordinary woman in her boudoir. She treated her husband as her sky and did not know anything about business. She could only pull the somewhat unwilling Miss Zhang away. "What does young Master Chu want to talk to this old man about?" Zhang Baiwan asked. Yili smiled and said, "Yesterday Lord Zhang donated 1 million grains to Prince Li. But according to this one's knowledge, Prince Li is sending out at least 800,000 soldiers this time. Taking everything into account, even if everything goes smoothly and we can agree to the Mahist army in the shortest time possible, it will still take at least half a year. In this period of time, the amount of grain needed is at least 3 million grains. And this is the most conservative estimate. Does Lord Zhang think that Prince Li's mansion can defeat the Prince Ding mansion in half a year?" Zhang Baiwan looked at him with some vigilance and said, "What does young master mean?" Yili smiled and said, "This one also has another piece of news. This time, the army has set out, but the imperial court did not transfer much grain from the granaries of various places. Because, this year, Xiling is suffering from drought and a lack of harvest. The situation of the northern tribes is also not very good. I think that Lord Zhang has some understanding of the grain business. The imperial court sold a large portion of the grain that had just entered the warehouse to Xiling a month ago. So, this conservative estimate of 3 million grains, in the end, I am afraid that Lord Zhang and the grain merchants of Jiangnan will have to bear the cost. Zhang Baiwan's face darkened when he heard this. Prince Li. Prince Li wants to destroy my Zhang family. Donating 1 million grains had already greatly damaged the vitality of the Zhang family. If the Zhang family had to bear the cost of all the grain, the Zhang family would probably be finished. More importantly, the Zhang family would not be able to gather so much grain in such a short time. When the time came, the crime of delaying military plans would be brought down. Zhang Baiwan's head would still roll. As expected, Prince Li did not plan to let him go from the beginning. Not only that, but, honestly speaking, this one can say that this war is not something that can be finished in a year or so. When the time comes, the Zhang family. Zhang Baiwan's face was ashen. He looked at Yi Li and said, "Young Master Chu, you did not come here just to scare me, did you?" Zhang Baiwan was also a shrewd businessman. He naturally knew that Yi Li would not come here just to play with him. Yi Li lowered his eyes and said lightly, "This one does have a way to help Lord Zhang, but I don't know if Lord Zhang is willing. Please save me, young Master Chu." Zhang Baiwan hurriedly said. Yi Li smiled and handed over an envelope. Zhang Baiwan took it and skimmed through it. His face could not help but change. He stared at Yi Li and said, "You. Young Master Chu, you are." Yi Li smiled and said, "This one's surname is Chu. The Chu family and the Su family are related by marriage." Zhang Baiwan understood. His expression kept changing. After a while, he asked, "Can young Master Chu make the decision?" Yi Li smiled and took out a token from his sleeve and placed it on the table. Zhang Baiwan stared at the black jade token with a murderous look on it. Even though he had never seen the Prince Ding Mansion's token, Zhang Baiwan really did not think that anyone in this world would dare to copy the Prince Ding Mansion's token. Also, the Chu family and the Su family were related by marriage. With the Su family's position in Li City, the possibility of Chu Junwei working for the Prince Ding Mansion was much higher than coming all the way to Jiangnan to rely on the Li Palace. "What does Lord Zhang think?" Yi Li asked. "If this old one does not agree, what does young Master Chu plan to do?" Zhang Baiwan asked. Yi Li said calmly, "Then I ask Lord Zhang to forget what happened today." Zhang Baiwan said in a low voice, "This old one needs to think about it." Yi Li did not waste time. He stood and said, "Since it is like this one will leave first." Zhang Baiwan looked at Yi Li and said with some luck, "Actually, if young Master Chu can agree to this old one's request, this old one can give you an answer right now." Seeing Zhang Baiwan's satisfied and expectant gaze, Yi Li rolled his eyes in his heart. He quickly said, "Lord Zhang, please forgive me. This one is just running errands. If Lord Zhang has any request, this one can pass it on for you. But if it has to do with me, I'm afraid, please forgive me, Lord Zhang." Chapter 9-11. Zhang Baiwan could only sigh. His disappointment was obvious. He really hoped that Chu Junwei could become the son-in-law of the Zhang family. In this way, the Zhang family would have more protection. Moreover, his daughter had high standards. Ordinary men would not enter her eyes. Unfortunately, after leaving the Zhang family, Yi Li, Wei Lin, and Zhuojing could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. Zhuojing said that Miss Zhang's eyes were almost glued to young master. Fortunately, young master saw the opportunity and sent her away. Otherwise, it would be really troublesome. Being handsome was also a mistake. They really did not know how young Master Qingchen had survived all these years. No wonder he provoked a crazy woman like Dong Fangyu. However, Princess Consort dressed as a man was worse than young Master Qingchen. Young Master Qingchen's immortal aura made people look up to him and dare not blaspheme him. However, Princess Consort dressed as a man was handsome and amiable. She was simply the best candidate for a good son-in-law. Princess consort, what if Zhang Baiwan runs to tell on us? Wei Lin frowned. Yi Li said indifferently, then we can only let Lord Zhang be a real money grubber. But I think he is a smart person. Wei Lin thought for a moment and said, yes, and with his money-grubbing temper, how could he send himself in when he knows that Mo Jingli wants to swallow up his Zhang family? Yi Li sighed and said lightly, it will be much easier to deal with the Zhang family and the Lin family. The Zhang family and the Lin family could be regarded as the richest in Nanjing. With their secret help, there was no need to worry about not being able to poke a big hole in Mo Jingli's logistics. Everything was carried out in secret in an orderly manner. Ever since he had been in the limelight at the regent's residence's banquet, Mo Jingli seemed to have remembered this young master from Yunzhou's Chu family. From time to time, he would send people to invite him to the residence to talk and ask for some opinions on political affairs. However, Yi Li was still a little worried that Mo Jingli would see through her and reveal something. Most of the time, she refused. Only when she really could not refuse would she go once. However, he did not expect that because of this, Mo Jingli valued him even more. It seemed like Mo Jingli also wanted to play a show of being courteous to the wise. Perhaps he was really worried that the Empress Dowager would affect the little emperor, so Mo Jingli really left the little emperor in the regent's residence. She would only bring it to the palace when she went to court every day. Although there were many people in the court who objected to this, Mo Jingli controlled all of the Dechu state's military power. Political power came from the barrel of a gun. This had always been the case in ancient times. Since ancient times, how many literati revolted successfully? Yi Li had also seen the little emperor once in the prince regent's residence. Compared to the last time she saw him at the banquet, he was even more weak and thin. Very quickly, news spread from the Li Palace that the little emperor had been poisoned with a slow-acting poison. When they received the news from the Li Palace, everyone could not help but be stunned. Wei Lin frowned. What exactly does Mo Jingli want to do? The eve of an expedition was the time when stability was required. Now that the little emperor had been poisoned to death, it was not a good thing for Mo Jingli. How much longer can Mo Suyan last? Yi Li asked in a low voice. Yaoji, who had come with Qin Feng, shook her head. Although the poison in the little emperor's body is slow-acting, it is still somewhat strong. Also, the little emperor seems to have some innate deficiencies. These 2 years, he has been greatly frightened by Mo Jingli. I'm afraid, even if the poison is cured, he won't be able to live to adulthood. Yaoji herself was the mother of a child, and she had not seen her own son for many years. She naturally felt more heartache for a child. Speaking of which, in this messy dispute, the most innocent person was the little emperor, who was only 8 or 9 years old. A child who did not know anything, without the love of his father, without the support of his mother, was suddenly pushed to the position of emperor before Mo Jingqi's death. What was waiting for him? As long as one had eyes, they could see clearly. Yi Li was silent. She had never been a heartless person. But to this child, although she could not say that she had harmed him, she had absolutely left him in the lurch. Everyone, for their own goals. The Empress Dowager, for her own power, Mo Jingli, for his high position, and she, for the Prince Ding mansion, had all chosen to give up this child. Princess, Mo Suyan's matter has nothing to do with us. Princess, why do you blame yourself? Qin Feng said in a low voice. Yi Li shook her head and smiled indifferently. I don't blame myself, but I'm a little emotional. He's just a child who doesn't know anything. Why was he born in the emperor's family? Yi Li rarely blamed herself. Self-blame was a kind of useless guilt. Instead of blaming herself, it was better not to do so in the first place. Since she had chosen, what was the use of blaming herself? Yaoji, go and tell Ying. Give me the list in her hand. I'll tell her the child's whereabouts immediately. If it's too late, she'll regret it. Yi Li said lightly. Yaoji frowned and said, I'm afraid Ying won't agree. She may not trust Princess in her heart. Now the list in her hand can be said to be the most important thing she can hold. She certainly won't give it out easily. Princess, you seem to consider telling her the child's news first? Yi Li sighed and said, if we tell her the child's news now, we really can't get the news. And, even you and many people in Nanjing will be in danger. Yaoji frowned and was somewhat puzzled. Qin Feng said, if we tell Yi Ying that her son is the little emperor, how can she help the Prince Ding mansion? The first thing she has to do is to tell this news to Mo Jingli. Now Princess Xixia is dead and Dongfang Yu is missing. Once the little emperor becomes Mo Jingli's son. Yaoji suddenly realized. She had spent a lot of time with Yi Ying. She naturally understood Yi Ying's temperament. Yi Ying was timid and not very smart. It was difficult for her to achieve great things. But she was selfish and didn't trust anyone at all. When necessary, she was ruthless enough. If her son became the emperor, she would be the Empress Dowager. Naturally, she didn't need to care about the Prince Ding mansion. Yaoji sighed helplessly and said, I'll go back and tell her. She only hoped that Yi Ying would be rational and not harm her son. Princess, what does Mo Jingli want to do to the little emperor now? It can't be that he can't wait and wants to ascend the throne immediately, right? If the little emperor dies in his princely mansion, he will be suspected. Zhuo Jing was puzzled and said. Mo Jingli always liked to be smart. He didn't seem like someone who didn't understand such a simple principle. Yi Li shook her head and said in a low voice, in fact, it may not be Mo Jingli who poisoned him. Someone wants to frame Mo Jingli. Everyone was puzzled. Qin Feng frowned and said, since Dongfang Yu disappeared, Mo Jingli has vigorously reorganized the princely mansion again. Now it can be said that the princely mansion is completely under Mo Jingli's control. Even we can find out the news, Mo Jingli can't not know. Chapter 9:12. Yi Li pondered for a long time before raising her brows. There's another person in the Li Palace who can act against Mo Suyan. Even if Mo Jingli knows, he won't expose her. Besides, if the little emperor dies like this, it's not necessarily a bad thing for Mo Jingli. Xian Zhao Grand Concubine? Lin Han asked. Yi Li nodded. That's right. Right now, the only people in the Li Palace who can act against Mo Suyun are Mo Jingli, Yi Ying, and Xian Zhao Grand Concubine. It's not easy to administer a slow-acting poison. It takes a lot of time. Even if the little emperor has no power, there are still many people serving him. Normal people definitely can't put the poison in Mo Suyun's food at the right time every day. Why does Xian Zhao Grand Concubine want to kill the little emperor? Wei Lin didn't understand. Yi Li smiled. Xian Zhao Grand Concubine and the Empress Dowager are cousins. That year, they entered the palace together to serve the late emperor. It can be said that for most of their lives, they supported each other through thick and thin. After Mo Jingqi ascended the throne, the Empress Dowager became the Empress Dowager and conferred Xian Zhao Grand Concubine as Grand Concubine. She moved out of the palace to live in the Li Palace. Compared to the other concubines of the late emperor, she's considered quite good. However, I've always had a question. In the Chu state, the lowest rank of concubines is Kairen. The highest is Empress. Below the Empress, there are Gui Fei and Fei. According to convention, after the late emperor passed away, concubines were conferred one level higher. In other words, under normal circumstances, Xian Zhao Grand Concubine was a concubine when the late emperor was alive. Then, Mo Jingqi should confer her the title of Gui Fei. However, why did Xian Zhao Grand Concubine remain a concubine her entire life? Yaoji supported her chin. At that time, no one raised any objections. That means it's reasonable to confer this title. Yi Li said, it's reasonable but not appropriate. Moreover, at that time, the late emperor's concubines were all demoted or killed by the Empress Dowager for various reasons. The only one left, Xian Zhao Grand Concubine, was given the grace of leaving the palace to live in luxury. It seems that she was naturally favored, but no one noticed this. Why do you think the Empress Dowager wants to send the virtuous old concubine out of the palace? Yaoji blinked her eyes and said in surprise, Empress Dowager, you don't want the virtuous old concubine to stay in the palace to fight for power with you? Then, the virtuous old concubine must have something on her that made the Empress Dowager not dare to touch her. That was why he had been living a peaceful life for so many years. Now that she has made a move on Mo Jingli, is it because she wants to push Mo Jingli onto the throne, and also because she wants to take revenge on the Empress Dowager? A Huang Nu Ying is an eternal story. However, I have never seen the existence of the so-called a Huang En Vying. Yi Li sighed softly. As long as she was a woman, she would be jealous. How could she have a deep sisterly relationship with another woman who shared a husband with her without the slightest grudge? Moreover, she was a woman in the palace. From the first day they entered the palace, there was only one thing they did: fight. Fight for favor, fight for status, fight for children. Mo Jingli is also the Empress Dowager's son. Wei Lin reminded. The virtuous old concubine Zhao did not have a child. No matter how deep she hid, she had already lost from the beginning. Giving birth to grace, raising grace, which is more important? Is Mo Jingli's current choice not enough to prove it? Yi Li smiled. Yaoji frowned and said, when the capital was just moved to Nanjing, it was said that Li Wang wanted to confer the title of Imperial Concubine Zhao to Imperial Concubine Zhao and control the harem together with the Empress Dowager. Later, I don't know why there was no news. Everyone present couldn't help but shake their heads. The imperial family's affairs were so complicated that it made them feel dizzy. Although the virtuous old concubine Zhao did not have a son, she had been playing the role of a sisterly relationship under the suppression of the Empress Dowager for many years. Presumably, she finally could not bear it anymore. However, they did not know that the relationship between Mo Jingli and the Empress Dowager was broken. How much effort did the virtuous old concubine Zhao contribute to it? Reporting to Gongzi, someone from the regent's residence came. He said that the regent asked for him. The steward outside the door reported in a low voice. Yi Li was silent for a moment, then nodded and said, I know, ask them to wait for a moment. The steward responded and left. Yi Li stood up and said, fine, I can go to the Li Wang residence to see what is going on. Yaoji frowned and said, Li Wang seems to often summon the princess these days. Will he see any flaws? With Mo Jingli's temperament, if he really saw any flaws, he would not be so polite to invite you. Don't worry. Yi Li said with a smile. When she arrived at the Li Wang residence, Yi Li was directly invited to Mo Jingli's study. When she stepped into the study, there were already many people inside. However, Yi Li was only familiar with one person, the current Marquis Muyang. Chu Junwei greets the regent. Yi Li cupped her hands and said. When Mo Jingli saw Yi Li come in, he seemed to be in a good mood and said, Gongzi Chu is here, please take a seat. Yi Li nodded and thanked him, then walked to the last seat and sat down. Although the Chu family was a famous family, the people present were all Mo Jingli's confidants. Yi Li naturally would not sit at the front without knowing the immensity of heaven and earth. Coincidentally, Yi Li sat diagonally across from Mu Yang. Mu Yang smiled and nodded at him. Yi Li also did not want to brush him off, so she smiled and nodded. Mo Jingli raised his eyebrows and looked at the two, asking, Marquis Muyang and Gongzi Chu know each other? Muyang said respectfully, Gongzi Chu is so elegant, I only regret not meeting you. Yi Li smiled and said, Marquis Muyang is overpraising me. I have long admired Marquis Muyang's great name. Seeing that the two did not look fake, Mo Jingli nodded with satisfaction. He did not object to the relationship between the house of Marquis Muyang and the Chu family, but he was not happy that Muyang was too close to the Chu family behind his back. Yi Li took the opportunity to ask, I wonder what prince summoned me for. Mo Jingli glanced at the crowd and said, this time, there is indeed something I need Gongzi Chu's help with. Previously, regarding the Zhang family, Gongzi Chu solved a big problem for I with just a few words. These days, Zhang Baiwan has been working very hard, this is all thanks to Gongzi Chu. Yili declined modestly, Prince is overpraising. This is all thanks to the prince's power to deter Jiangnan. I dare not claim the credit. Mo Jingli sighed and said, I indeed have something important I need Gongzi Chu's help with, I hope Gongzi Chu will not decline. Yi Li's heart skipped a beat, but he said calmly, I await Prince's orders. Mo Jingli stared at Yi Li without moving, and said in a deep voice, I would like to ask Gongzi Chu to write an imperial edict for me. Yi Li's heart shook. He glanced at the people present, there was no change in their expressions. He knew that these people all knew what Mo Jingli wanted to say. Or it could be said that these people were waiting for him. Yi Li took a deep breath and asked, There are many talents in the imperial court, there are countless seniors who can write an imperial edict for me. I'm afraid. Is Gongzi Chu unwilling? Mo Jingli's face darkened as he asked lightly. Yi Li sighed helplessly in his heart. He already understood what Mo Jingli wanted him to write. But, this thing could not be written. Once it was written, then the little emperor, Mo Suyun, would probably die. Chapter 9:13. What imperial edict does Prince want this humble one to write? Zhuo Jing and Wei Lin were not allowed to enter the Li Palace's study, so they could only wait outside. Moreover, even if they were by her side, Yi Li did not plan on shedding all pretense of cordiality with Mo Jingli so quickly. Mo Jingli's expression finally relaxed, and he said with a bit of sadness, to be honest, His Majesty's health has not been good these days. I'm afraid. His Majesty is still young, so he naturally does not have an heir. Thus, he intends to abdicate the throne. I would like to ask young Master Chu to write an imperial edict for me. Young Master Chu is a descendant of a prestigious family, so I believe that you will not disappoint. Mo Jingli's attitude made Yi Li feel even more disgusted. He was clearly very pleased with himself, but he still pretended to be sad. Which imperial son of the previous emperor does His Majesty intend to abdicate the throne to? Yi Li's expression did not change as she asked innocently. The emperor did not have an heir, so the throne could only be passed down to someone else. However, it was usually passed down to the person closest to him by blood. Brothers first, then nephews. It was rare for the throne to be passed down to an uncle. Yi Li's question was not considered rude. A trace of coldness flashed through Mo Jingli's eyes, but he did not answer Yi Li's question. Mu Yang, who was sitting across from him, smiled and said, Young Master Chu misunderstands. His Majesty intends to abdicate the throne to the Prince Regent. After all, most of His Majesty's brothers are still young. The Chu state is currently in a precarious situation, so it really needs a capable ruler. Although His Majesty is still young, he is wholeheartedly thinking for the De Chu state. For the De Chu state's territory. He's probably scared by you, right? Yi Li laughed coldly in her heart. Glancing at Mo Jingli with some hesitation, Yi Li pretended to be in a difficult position and said, Prince, please forgive me. At this time, I'm afraid, this one will need to discuss this with the main family. What's more, even though I'm a member of the Chu family, I'm only from a side branch of the family. Something like an abdication edict. Since ancient times, there weren't many emperors who were willing to abdicate the throne. In order to show that they had the support of the people, the edict naturally had to be written by someone with more influence. However, there were some things that were written well that would be passed down to later generations, but there were also some that would go down in infamy for 10,000 years. Although Yi Li had borrowed the identity of a member of the Chu family, she had no intention of tarnishing their reputation. If he was smart enough, the edict Mo Jingli wanted him to write would probably be put under the name of the Chu family's direct descendant. The world would only know that it was written by a member of the Chu family. Who cared if Chu Junwei was a direct descendant or a side branch of the family? Did he even exist in the Chu family? Actually, it wasn't that Mo Jingli wanted to force Yi Li to write this edict. It was that he couldn't find a suitable person to write it. The old officials in the court naturally wouldn't be willing to sacrifice their reputation to write this edict. However, most of Mo Jingli's trusted subordinates didn't have any reputation. Even though Chu Junwei was a side branch of the Chu family, he still had the name of the Chu family. The Chu family could be considered one of the top families in the Dechu state other than the Su family. If he could find young Master Qing Chen to write the edict, Mo Jingli wouldn't need to care if Yi Li was willing or not. Mo Jingli stared at Yi Li with displeasure and said, "It's just a small matter. Young Master Chu is avoiding it in every way possible. Are you looking down on I?" Yi Li really wanted to slap Mo Jingli's face. If the person here was really just a side branch young master of the Chu family, Mo Jingli would set up such a situation. If the Chu family's young master was found to be in cahoots, he would have no choice but to commit suicide. Prince's words are too serious. Yi Li said firmly, "But this matter is of great importance. This one really doesn't dare to act on my own accord. Prince doesn't want news to spread that the Chu family has expelled Junwei from the family right after this one writes the edict, right? If this was true, then the entire Chu family would give Mo Jingli a hard slap in the face. At that time, the situation would be even uglier than just casually pulling someone to write the edict. Not to mention anything else, if the Su family took the opportunity to say something, most of the scholars in the world wouldn't listen to Mo Jingli. Mo Jingli also knew that Yi Li was speaking the truth. But when he confidently made a request, he was met with neither soft nor hard rebuff. This made Mo Jingli lose face. Mu Yang, who was sitting down, saw this situation and quickly said, "Prince, young Master Chu's concerns aren't without reason. Young Master Chu is a scholar. It's inevitable that he won't be able to understand some things in a short time. There's no harm in letting young Master Chu think about it for 2 days. Presumably, young Master Chu will figure it out by then." Mo Jingli nodded. He looked at Yi Li and said, "I value young Master Chu very much. I ask young Master Chu to consider it carefully. With young Master Chu's talent, it's possible that he won't become the second young Master Qing Chen." Yi Li secretly laughed in her heart. She didn't dare to think that her wisdom was comparable to her big brother's. However, the price Mo Jingli paid to win him over this time was very considerable. Who didn't know that young Master Qing Chen was a person above tens of thousands of people in the Prince Ding mansion? It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he had the power to overturn the world. As long as one was a scholar, who didn't see young Master Qing Chen as a role model and a direction to strive for? However, Yi Li was sure that even if she was really Chu Junwei, she wouldn't choose Mo Jingli. Mo Xiaoyao had the courage and ability to tolerate tens of thousands of people, but Mo Jingli didn't. She was afraid that when Mo Jingli stood firm, the first unlucky one would be this second young Master Qing Chen. Yi Li respectfully replied, "Thank you, Prince, for your kindness. This one will consider it carefully." Mo Jingli looked deeply at Yi Li and nodded, "Okay, I will let people send young Master back to the mansion." "Thank you, Prince." Yi Li didn't refuse. She naturally understood what Mo Jingli meant. She didn't mind. Since he already knew such an important matter, how could Mo Jingli be at ease to let him leave like this? However, Mo Jingli didn't know that if Yi Li wanted to disappear from Nanjing, even if he dug 3 feet into the ground, he wouldn't be able to find her. Zhuo Jing and Wei Lin, who were waiting outside, saw that Yi Li went in and came out with a few guards from the Li Palace. Their faces couldn't help but change. Yi Li casually waved her hand, indicating that they shouldn't act rashly. The two immediately calmed down and stepped forward to salute. "This subordinate greets young master." Yi Li nodded and said, "Go back." "Yes, young master." Yi Li walked out of the Li Palace with her newly acquired attendants, Zhuo Jing and Wei Lin. But when she passed by the garden, she saw the little emperor wearing bright yellow clothes. It had only been 2 or 3 days since the last time they met, but the little emperor's thin face had become a little sallow. His pair of eyes, which always seemed to be filled with fear, became even more dim and lifeless. Everyone could see that this child didn't have long to live. Mo Suyun walked slowly in the garden. The eunuchs and palace maids following behind him lowered their heads. No one did anything. It was as if as long as the little emperor didn't leave their sight, it didn't matter what they did. The path in the garden wasn't very smooth. Mo Suyun seemed to see something interesting in front of him. His dim eyes lit up slightly and he ran forward. But his body was already very weak. He lost his balance and fell to the ground. But even so, the eunuchs and palace maids following behind him didn't help him up. It was as if these people had suddenly become puppets without consciousness. Chapter 9:14. It was very painful to fall from the uneven cobblestones. When Mo Suyun fell down, his 2 arms were bleeding. Tears suddenly welled up in his eyes, but for some reason, they did not fall. Mo Suyun did not get up. He just lay on the ground and stared blankly at his bleeding and burning arms. A pair of white and slender hands gently picked him up from the ground. Mo Suyun blinked his eyes and stared blankly at the handsome young master in white clothes in front of him. Does it hurt? Yili squatted down and looked at the child who was at the same level as her and asked softly. Tears welled up in Mo Suyun's eyes. After a while, he nodded. Yili sighed softly in her heart. How could she not see this child's abnormality? Compared to a few days ago, this child's reaction was much slower. When the people following Mo Suyun saw someone coming, they quickly stepped forward to stop them. This young master, the emperor should go back to rest. Yili glanced at them and smiled faintly. So you know that he is still the emperor? The palace maid who spoke paled, but she quickly recovered and said, we naturally know that he is still the emperor. So, we ask young master to leave quickly. The emperor is not someone that anyone can meet. Although the palace maid's tone seemed very polite, Yili could still hear a trace of pride and emphasis on, still the emperor. Obviously, she was instructed to treat Mo Suyun like this. The guards behind Yili also stepped forward and wanted to ask Yili to leave. But when they knew that the prince still needed this Chu Junwei, they did not dare to be too tough. Greetings to princess. While they were in a deadlock, Yi Ying walked over with people. She glanced at everyone and asked, what are you doing? The palace maid who spoke to Yili before stepped forward and said, reporting to princess, we are following the orders of imperial concubine to accompany the emperor out to play. This young master Chu is blocking the emperor's path and is unwilling to leave. Yi Ying did not comment and looked at Yili. Yili smiled and said, replying to Wang Fei, this one only saw his majesty fall and conveniently helped him up. Then, Yili lifted her sleeve, indicating that the little emperor was holding on to her and would not let go. Yi Ying was silent for a moment, then said, young master Chu is the prince's honored guest. Since the emperor likes him, then let him play with the emperor for a while. Why are you making such a fuss over nothing? Your Highness. But the old concubine. Of course, I'll go back and explain to concubine dowager. With so many people watching, you still let his majesty fall. Are you all dead? Yi Ying said coldly. Although these people were all loyal to the virtuous consort, they did not dare to talk back to Yi Ying, the Li Wang Fei, in front of outsiders. They could only shut their mouths. Yili took the medicine handed over by the guard Lin and carefully applied the medicine for Mo Suyun. She asked without turning her head, why didn't you call for an imperial physician? The person serving Mo Suyun hesitated for a moment, then turned and left. Because Mo Suyun had been holding on to Yili's sleeve, Yili could not leave for the time being. She could only carry Mo Suyun to a pavilion in the garden to sit for a while. Sitting in the pavilion with Mo Suyun in her arms, Yili looked at Yi Ying faintly and asked, do you know what the virtuous consort did? Yi Ying's expression changed, and she asked in a panic, old concubine? What did the old concubine do? Yi Li's heart sank. Looking at Yi Ying's expression, she knew that she did not know what the virtuous consort did. Why didn't you tell Yaoji about this? Yi Ying bit the corner of her lips and said, this is not an important matter, and it has nothing to do with the Prince Ding mansion. Why would I tell her? What's more? I didn't tell her, but didn't you know? I knew, but unfortunately, it was too late. Yi Li said. Yi Ying did not care and said, don't tell me you still want to save him. He is the emperor of the Dechu state, and you are the consort of the Prince Ding mansion. What good would it do you to save him? Yi Li smiled faintly and said, do you think that if Mo Jingli becomes the emperor, you will definitely be the empress? Yi Ying's face turned pale. Of course, she knew that if there was no support, even if Mo Jingli became the emperor, she might not be able to become the empress. Originally, she had the support of the Prince Ding mansion, but now Mo Jingli had decided to go to war with the Prince Ding mansion. You can try and tell Mo Jingli my whereabouts. See if he will be in a good mood and give you the position of empress. Yi Li looked at her with a smile and said. But the faint coldness in her eyes made Yi Ying's heart tremble. She bit the corner of her lips and said, I won't betray you. Betraying you won't do me any good. Mo Jingli's personality was vengeful. If she told him Yi Li's information, then he would definitely reveal that she was investigating for the Prince Ding mansion. At that time, Yi Li would naturally be in trouble, but in the end, she would still be the unlucky one. Not to mention, the news of her child was still in Yi Li's hands. Yi Li looked at her calmly and said, you still insist on not giving me the list? Yi Ying gritted her teeth and said, help me find my child first. Also. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at her with interest. Yi Ying said, after Mo Jingli ascends the throne, you have to help me become the empress. Yi Ying. Yi Li looked at her with some pity and said in a low voice, you will regret it. The people outside came in with the imperial physician. But the child kept holding on to Yi Li's sleeve. Yi Li persuaded him for a while before letting him let go of his sleeve to let the imperial physician check. Yi Li was speechless when she saw that the imperial physician was only half-heartedly checking on his injuries, ignoring the obvious abnormality in his condition. She stood up and walked out of the pavilion. The guards who were waiting outside immediately came forward. Yi Li turned her head and said, go and tell the Prince Regent, don't make it too ugly. It won't do any good to the prince's reputation. The guards were stunned for a moment, but one of them turned and went in the direction of Mo Jingli's study. Yi Li looked back at the child who was sitting at the table in the pavilion in a daze and was being tortured by the imperial physician. She turned and said, let's go. Young master, the emperor. Wei Lin couldn't help but ask. They weren't heartless cold-blooded animals. Seeing a child who didn't know anything become numb and wait for death, Wei Lin felt some pity in his heart. Yi Li shook her head and said, I'm afraid, the emperor doesn't have much time left. The guards who followed Yi Li out of the Fu looked at Yi Li with some surprise. They didn't expect this elegant and handsome young master to be so daring. He knew that they were sent by the prince to spy on them, but he still dared to say these words in front of them. But they didn't understand one thing. When the other party didn't care about revealing some secrets in front of you, it meant that he thought you would never reveal his secrets. And in this world, the people who were least likely to reveal secrets were the dead. After listening to Yi Li's words, Zhuo Jing and Wei Lin tacitly swept their cold gazes over the guards. A faint murderous aura flashed through their eyes for a moment. The next day, news came from the Li Palace. The palace maids and eunuchs who served Mo Suyun were all beaten to death. Hearing Zhuo Jing's report, Yi Li's hands only paused for a moment before she continued to busy herself with the matters at hand. Chapter 9:15. 2 days later, when Mo Jingli sent people to the Chu mansion again, the Chu family was already gone. Only a letter written by Chu Junwei was left, saying that although the Chu family could not be loyal to the emperor, they could not go against the flow and murder the emperor. As for the guards sent by Mo Jingli, no one saw them again. Mo Jingli was furious when he heard the news, but where could he find Yi Li? At this time, Yi Li was already deep in the mountains dozens of miles away from Nanjing City. Standing on the edge of a few small huts, Yi Li looked at the scenery in front of her and nodded with a smile. It's a good place to recuperate. Sister Li, Yungu came out of the hut and saw Yi Li standing outside the hut looking at her with a smile. She immediately used her qinggong to land in front of Yi Li. "Sister Li, how did you get in?" Yi Li smiled and said, "The array outside has to be wrong. It took me more than 2 hours to get in." Yungu blinked her eyes blankly and said, "But I didn't feel anyone coming in." Yi Li smiled and patted her pink and tender little face. "Is Big Brother okay?" "Oh, I forgot. Su Qingqian's medicine." Yungu cried out in annoyance and rushed back to the hut without caring that Yi Li was still behind her. She had just finished boiling the medicine when she heard a noise outside. She quickly came out to see, but almost forgot that Su Qingqian's medicine had been poured out. If he didn't drink it quickly, it would get cold. Seeing Yungu walk out of the hut with a bowl of medicine and walk to another hut, Yi Li raised her eyebrows and followed. "Su Qingqian, drink the medicine." Yungu walked into Su Qingqian's room with the medicine. Su Qingqian put down the book in his hand and looked at the medicine bowl in her hand and frowned. "Yungu, you really can't make these medicine into pills?" After this injury, young Master Qingqian knew that he was afraid of taking medicine. In the past, young Master Qingqian was naturally not afraid of taking medicine, but this time, for more than half a month, he drank medicine 3 times a day. Moreover, the pills made by Yungu were fragrant and sweet, and melted in the mouth. However, the medicine that was brewed was unbelievably disgusting. Su Qingqian dared to swear that he had never drunk such a bad medicine in his life. But, he had seen the prescription prescribed by Yungu. It was the most common prescription for internal injuries. Su Qingqian, who knew a little bit about medicine. Even if he added a handful of Chinese gold thread, it would not be worse than the medicine in front of him. How can that be? Although the pills are tasty and easy to store, their efficacy is much worse than those that are brewed now. Yungu vetoed his suggestion and said, "It's not a troublesome medicine that requires a lot of time. Naturally, it's better to boil it and drink it. This way, your injury will heal faster." Looking at the smiling girl in front of him, Su Qingqian helplessly reached out to take the medicine bowl to his lips and drank it. Yungu nodded with satisfaction and praised, "Su Qingqian, you're the fastest person I've ever seen to drink medicine." Yungu actually knew how bad this medicine was because she had grown up drinking her father's cooking. Every time she drank the medicine, she had to dawdle for a long time. Most of the people her father saved in the mountains also refused to boil the medicine with her father. "Since you know it's bad, you should boil the medicine to make it taste better." Su Qingqian smiled bitterly. "How can that be? Father said that the medicine that milds the taste most likely has an antidote." "And?" Yungu looked at him with a smile and said, "Knowing that the medicine is bad will make you less injured and less sick." Young Master Qingqian wanted to say that she was thinking too much. He only hoped that she could boil the medicine to make it taste normal. Big Brother, I didn't expect the famous young Master Qingqian to be afraid of drinking medicine." Outside the door, Yi Li finally couldn't help laughing. "Li er?" Su Qingqian raised his head and looked at the door. Yi Li stepped into the room and looked up and down. Although it was just a simple mountain hut, the furnishings in the room were only a bed, a table, and 2 stools. But it was very clean. There was also a somewhat clumsy but very cute wooden vase on the table. There were 2 simple flowers in the vase. The whole room was filled with a faint smell of medicine. She then looked at Su Qingqian. Perhaps it was because he had taken more medicine than food these days, but young Master Qingqian's handsome face was slightly thinner. However, his complexion was still good. He didn't look like someone who had suffered internal injuries at all. Obviously, Yungu took good care of him. Seeing Yi Li come in, Yungu remembered that she had left the guest outside the door. She smiled at Yi Li embarrassedly and said in a crisp voice, "Sister Yi Li, have a seat. I'll go get you some tea." "Thank you, Yungu." Yi Li smiled and sat down on the stool beside the bed. She smiled and looked at Yungu, who waved her hand and quickly went out of the hut to get tea. "She's really a cute little girl. Big Brother, don't you think so?" Yi Li said with a smile. Su Qingqian smiled and nodded in agreement. "She's really interesting." Yi Li was slightly embarrassed. It turned out that in young Master Qingqian's eyes, a little girl wasn't divided into beautiful and cute, but interesting or not. "How's Big Brother's injury?" Yi Li asked with concern. Su Qingqian stroked his chest and said with a smile, "Although Yun Ji's medicine is disgusting, the effect is good. It's almost healed." Yi Li said with a smile, "Bitter medicine cures the illness." Young Master Qingqian's handsome face, which had always been full of immortal charm, showed a rare struggle. He said with some helplessness, "I feel that I'm regretting my previous decision. Yunge said that I still have to take medicine continuously for 3 months to completely recover from my internal injuries." Taking medicine for 3 months was not terrible. What was terrible was that no matter what kind of medicine was brewed by Miss Yunge, it would taste the same. There would never be a situation that was more disgusting than her medicine. Even Yunge herself could not do it because that was the limit of disgusting. With Miss Yunji's enthusiasm, she would definitely brew the medicine for him personally. Young Master Qingqian felt that he was not blessed to enjoy it. Looking at Su Qingqian's conflicted look, Yi Li could not help but cover her mouth and chuckle. "It's really rare to see Big Brother like this. Yungu has good intentions. If Big Brother rejects her, won't she be sad?" Yi Li's hearing, sight, and smell were better than the average person. Just now, she smelled the thick and strange smell from Su Qingqian's bowl outside the door. At the same time, she made a decision to ask Miss Yungu to continue taking care of Big Brother's injury. It was really rare to see Big Brother like this. Looking at Yi Li's rare playful smile, Su Qingqian shook his head helplessly. He looked at Yi Li and asked, "Aren't you working in Nanjing City? Why do you have time to see me today? What's the matter?" Yi Li sighed. "Big Brother really has good foresight. Something has indeed happened." "What's wrong?" Su Qingqian raised his eyebrows and asked. Yi Li told him about the regent's residence in detail. Mo Jingli suddenly wanted to abolish Yi Li's position and become independent, which really surprised Yi Li. Chapter 9:16. Su Qingqian smiled and said, "Li is still soft-hearted. So what if you wrote the abdication edict for him?" Mo Jingli wanted to establish himself as the emperor at this time mostly because he wanted to suppress Prince Ding's manner in terms of status when they were on the battlefield. As long as the Chu family comes out to explain that there is no Chu Junwei in the Chu family, it won't be a problem. Yi Li smiled bitterly and shook her head, saying, "Perhaps, if I wrote the edict that day, I'm afraid that right now, Big Brother would be hearing the news of Mo Jingli ascending the throne." Su Qingqian sighed slightly and said, "Mo Jingli is still too impatient." "Li are you pitying that child?" "There's no use in pitying him. That child is already beyond cure. Even if we save him, he won't live for long." Yi Li shook her head and said. Although it was said that way, for her to personally save a child who didn't know anything, Yi Li knew that she couldn't do it. Su Qingqian looked at her with some pity and said, "With your and Mo Xiaoyao's personalities, I don't know how you two have lived so peacefully for so many years." In terms of nature, Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao's personalities were like heaven and earth. Yi Li could be ruthless to bad people, but she was easily soft-hearted to innocent people. Mo Xiaoyao was different. He looked gentle, but as long as he could achieve his goal, he didn't care who he dragged into the situation. Now, with the relationship between Mo Jingli and Mo Suyun, who dared to say that Mo Xiaoyao wasn't involved in it? If Mo Xiaoyao really wanted to investigate, how could he not find out Mo Suyun's identity? It was likely that Mo Xiaoyao already guessed, so he didn't let anyone investigate. Yi Li smiled and said, "Xiaoyao is Xiaoyao, I am me. Even if we are husband and wife, there's no rule that says we have to think the same. As long as we can understand each other, it's enough." "Then how do you plan to deal with Mo Jingli? Are we just going to let him be like this?" Yi Li smiled helplessly. "Does Big Brother think that I can overthrow Mo Jingli's rule in Jiangnan in a short month?" It was easy to find trouble for Mo Jingli, but to oust him from his position in Jiangnan, even if Mo Xiaoyao came personally, it would be difficult to do so in a short period of time. Su Qingchen looked at Yi Li with a smile. Yi Li, what do you plan to do? After so many years together, Su Qingchen understood Yi Li quite well. It was impossible for her to say that she did not intend to do anything. Yi Li muttered, "Tell Ying about Mo Suyan's true identity. Li is still soft-hearted. No wonder Prince Ding is worried about you." Su Qingchen sighed. Yi Li shook her head and said, "No, I want to bet." In Mo Jingli's eyes, his son is not as important as the throne. "Big brother, isn't Yun Ji's medical skills very good?" Su Qingchen raised her eyebrows and said, "You want Yungu to save Mo Suyan?" Yi Li lowered her eyes and said, "Mo Suyan's illness can no longer be cured with medicine. I just want him to live a little longer. I also want to see what Mo Jingli will do if Mo Suyan does not die in a short period of time." Su Qingchen nodded and said, "I will ask Yungu later." "What do you want to ask me?" Yungu carried a pot of tea and walked in with light steps. She smiled at Yi Li embarrassedly and said, "My family does not have any good tea. Sister Yi Li, please make do with this." The tea that Yungu carried was not some famous tea, but the flower tea that she made herself. The faint fragrance of the flower filled her nose. Yi Li took a deep breath and said with a smile, "It's very fragrant. It's good that Sister Li likes it. Do you have anything to ask me?" Seeing that Yi Li did not dislike her crude flower tea, Yungu was also very happy. Although she rarely came into contact with people, she had been to the city. Naturally, she knew that those rich people who lived in big houses looked down on these wild things. What's more, Sister Li was a high and mighty princess. If Yi Li knew what she thought, she would definitely introduce Zhang Baiwan to her. At least, Zhang Baiwan would never dislike Yun Ji's flower tea. He might even beg Yungu to provide it for free 365 days a year. Su Qingchen said, "Li wants to ask you to save a child. Is Yungu willing to go?" "Sure." Yungu nodded and agreed without hesitation. Su Qingchen looked at her with some surprise and said, "Yungu is really willing?" Yungu was puzzled and said, "Father said that a doctor has the heart of a parent. Why should I not be willing?" Su Qingchen suddenly felt that she was tacky. Sure enough, it was not a good thing to be too scheming. Seeing Yungu and her father living in seclusion, she was used to thinking that Yun Ji's father did not want to practice medicine anymore because of some accident. "Thank you, Yungu," Su Qingchen said with a smile. Yungu smiled faintly, "You're welcome. I don't know if I can cure him. When the time comes, don't blame me for not being good at medicine. I will work hard." Su Qingchen nodded and said, "In that case, I'm going to take you to find someone, right? Let's go to the city together later." Yungu nodded without objection and said obediently, "I'll go and prepare something." Naturally, they could not go back to the Chu mansion. Yi Li stayed at Yun Ji's house for a night. The next day, they packed up and quietly returned to Nanjing City. This time, the place where they settled down was an inconspicuous mansion in a noisy area of the city. Yi Li could not come back as Chu Junwei this time. In the blink of an eye, she had turned into a beautiful woman with delicate features. She accompanied her sickly brother and younger sister to Nanjing to recuperate. This place was the most prosperous and chaotic place in Nanjing City. Their group of people living in the mansion in a low-key manner naturally did not attract anyone's attention. After settling down in the mansion, Qin Feng and Lin Han personally took Yungu to the Li Palace that night and let Yungu treat Mo Suyan. At night, Yi Li and Su Qingchen sat in the study room and played chess. Yi Li slowly put down a piece and looked at Su Qingchen opposite her. She smiled softly and said, "Big brother's injury is not healed yet. Why don't you go back to your room and rest? I'll wait here for Yungu to come back." Su Qingchen shook his head and said, "It's okay. They should be back soon. I'll wait for a while and see what's going on. Try not to go out these few days. I'm afraid that Mo Jingli's people are still secretly investigating." Yi Li smiled and said, "Li knows. Big brother, don't worry. Qin Feng and Lin Han are both reliable. What's more, Yungu is also an expert. Nothing will happen to her. Su Qingchen slowly put down a piece and looked at her with a faint smile. Who said I was worried? Yi Li shrugged indifferently and said with a smile, I'm a little worried. Su Qingchen shook his head and stopped talking. There was a soft sound outside the door. Soon, the door of the study room was pushed open. Qin Feng and the other two walked in. Yun Ji's clear big eyes were particularly bright, and her small face was also red. Obviously, she had never done something like breaking into someone's mansion in the middle of the night, so she was a little nervous. Yi Li pulled Yungu to sit down and poured a cup of tea for her. Yungu, you've worked hard. Did you encounter any danger? Yungu smiled and said, No, Big Brother Qin Feng and Big Brother Lin Han are both very powerful. The guards of the regent's palace didn't even see us. In fact, in terms of Qinggong, Qin Feng and Lin Han might not be comparable to Yungu. But in terms of sneaking around in the middle of the night, the two of them were naturally much better than her. If Yungu, this rookie, went alone, she would have been chased everywhere. Chapter 9:17. Yi Li patted the little girl's head with a faint smile and asked, How is the child's condition? Hearing Yi Li's words, Yun Ji's little face immediately drooped. She looked at Yi Li with tears in her eyes. Yi Li pondered for a moment and asked, Not good? Yungu nodded dejectedly and said, That child was born with a congenital deficiency. He probably didn't live well when he was young. The poison in his body completely destroyed his body. Originally, even if he wasn't poisoned, that child might not live past 20 years old. But now, that child has suffered a lot of shocks for a long time. Even if I detoxify him, he can't be raised carefully. If he suffers a little more shock, he won't be able to live. But Brother Qin and Brother Lin said we can't bring him back. Yungu was a little emotional when talking about the patient. Especially since she lived in seclusion in the mountains all year round and didn't experience much of the world. Seeing such a pitiful child, she couldn't help but sympathize with him. Yi Li nodded and said, That child is the current emperor. If you bring him out of the Li Palace, something big will happen. Yungu nodded. She was just pure in her heart, but she wasn't insensible. She thought for a moment and said, I'll make some pills tonight. Sisterly, you can give them to that child tomorrow. Although there's no way to treat his illness, it can still make him feel better. Yi Li said softly, You're tired tonight. Don't worry. It's not too late to prepare tomorrow. I'll ask them to prepare the herbs you need for you later. Okay. Su Qingchen. In fact, among the people in the room, the person Yungu was most familiar with was Su Qingchen, so she couldn't help but look at Su Qingchen. In the end, the reason why she trusted Yi Li, Qin Feng, Lin Han, and the others so much was based on the fact that they were people Su Qingchen knew. Su Qingchen smiled faintly and said, Yungu is tired. Go and rest early. Oh. Then, you should also find some rest. Yungu nodded obediently and followed the maid waiting at the door to return to her room. Seeing Yungu leave, the door of the study closed again and the study fell silent. After a while, Su Qingchen said, Li, don't think too much. Now that things have come to this, the Prince Ding mansion is also in trouble. I've let that child down. Mo Suyun was indeed very innocent and pitiful, but in this chaotic world, who wasn't innocent and who wasn't pitiful? At least, Yi Li had given Mo Jingli and Ying a chance to make amends. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, Big brother, you don't need to persuade me. I understand. That night, a piece of paper silently appeared at Yi Ying's bedside. There were only 3 simple words on the note, Mo Suyun. Yi Ying was in a daze for a long time with the note in her hand. Slowly, her face became paler and paler. Prince. Prince. Early in the morning, Yi Ying's urgent cries came from outside Mo Jingli's study. Mo Jingli, who was dealing with political affairs, frowned unhappily. Chu Junwei's sudden disappearance in Nanjing had already made Mo Jingli very unhappy. At this time, he really didn't have the mood to care about Yi Ying. Originally, he thought that Nanjing had always been under his control. However, in less than a month, Chu Junwei and Dong Fangyu disappeared under his nose. How could Mo Jingli not be angry and vigilant? Princess, Prince has ordered that he won't see anyone. The voice of the guard outside the door refused. Get out of the way. I have something important to discuss with Prince. Yi Ying angrily rebuked. Princess, listening to Yi Ying's voice that seemed to not give up until she got what she wanted, Mo Jingli frowned and put down his pen. He said loudly, "Let her in." Yi Ying pushed the door open and came in. She didn't have time to salute Mo Jingli and hurriedly came forward and said, "Prince, I've found our child." Mo Jingli was stunned but quickly regained his senses. He said calmly, "What nonsense are you talking about now?" It was not that Mo Jingli didn't believe Yi Ying, but Yi Ying stayed in the Li Palace all day long and had no power in her hands. Even Mo Jingli didn't have the slightest clue about this. How could Yi Ying know? Yi Ying said anxiously, "It's true. Prince, you have to believe me." Mo Jingli furrowed his brows and said impatiently, "All right, you can speak. Where is the child?" Yi Ying said, "It's the Emperor. Prince, you have to save him. He's our child." "You're crazy." Mo Jingli pushed her away and said angrily. Yi Ying, who was pushed away, rushed over and grabbed his sleeve, saying, "It's true, you have to believe me. He's really our child, woo-woo. I beg you to save him, he's about to die." "How did you know that the child is our child?" Mo Jingli asked with a gloomy face. Yi Ying was speechless. Of course, she knew that the note was sent to her by Yi Li, but she couldn't say it. Once she revealed Yi Li's matter, not only would Mo Jingli not let her off, even the people in the Prince Ding mansion would not let her off. She shook her head in horror. "No. I can't say it." Mo Jingli's eyes flashed with a cold light and he sneered, "You can't say it? If you can't say it, why did you come to I? Get out." Yi Ying was stunned and bit her lip, saying, "But the child." Mo Jingli said indifferently, "What child?" Mo Suyun is Mo Jingqi's son. "No. That's our child, Prince. He's your only son." Yi Ying cried out in panic. If Mo Jingli refused to acknowledge this child, then this child, as Mo Jingqi's son and the current emperor, could only die. Looking at Mo Jingli's indifferent expression, Yi Ying's heart turned cold. She didn't know why, but she suddenly remembered the day Princess Xixia died, and couldn't help but shiver. "Come, send the princess consort back to her room. Without I's order, no one is allowed to see her," Mo Jingli said in a low voice. Unable to resist, Yi Ying was forcefully sent back to her courtyard by the guards. When she returned to her room, she threw herself on the bed and finally burst into tears. At this moment, she finally understood why Yi Li said she would regret it. Because now, she really did start to feel regret. In the study, Mo Jingli's expression was gloomy and uncertain. Although he mercilessly chased Yi Ying away, Yi Ying's words still left a deep mark in his heart. Yi Ying naturally wouldn't lie about this kind of thing for no reason, but to say that Mo Suyun was the child who had been missing for many years, for some reason, Mo Jingli didn't feel the slightest joy of regaining his beloved son. Instead, he felt even more irritated and angry. At the same time, Mo Jingli also began to think about why Mo Jingqi would pass the throne to Mo Suyun. Mo Suyun was the prince with the lowest maternal family background among all the princes of Mo Jingqi. His body and potential were the weakest. Passing the throne to such a prince was simply giving him a chance to wield power. Could it be? Mo Jingqi wanted him and his father to kill each other. Chapter 9:18. Thinking of this, Mo Jingli shook his head fiercely. Unconsciously, he had already acknowledged Yi Ying's words in his heart. Come, bring the Empress Dowager to the Prince Ding mansion for me. The guards outside the door couldn't help but feel cold. The Empress Dowager was naturally the little emperor's birth mother, Li Shi. But even if Li Shi was cowardly and incompetent, she was still the emperor's birth mother and the Empress Dowager. The prince casually let people bring her from the palace to the Prince Ding mansion. It was really a bit, go quickly. Mo Jingli angrily rebuked. Yes, I'll go immediately. The palace was very close to the Prince Ding mansion, and Li Shi was soon brought there. But Li Shi didn't come alone. The Empress Dowager, who was already under house arrest, came with her. Although he was angry that the Empress Dowager once again disobeyed his order and left the palace without permission, Mo Jingli also knew that the Empress Dowager could leave the palace safely under the situation that he sent to guard her. There must be many people in the palace who belonged to the Empress Dowager. But at this time, he was not in the mood to pay attention to the Empress Dowager. He just stared at Li Shi, who was already trembling with fear. Concubine Xian Zhao is here. Before he could say anything, the eunuch's sharp voice came from outside the door. Mo Jingli was stunned. He stood up and greeted the concubine Xian Zhao. He looked at the concubine Xian Zhao and said, "Why is mother here?" The concubine Xian Zhao was angered by Dongfang Yu a few days ago. She was not fully recovered after these days. At this time, she was supported by people and looked a little thin. Seeing the Empress Dowager sitting in the study, she was stunned for a moment and then smiled faintly. Sister is also here? The Empress Dowager was naturally dissatisfied that her son was so attentive to the concubine Xian Zhao and put her under house arrest. She just looked at the concubine Xian Zhao coldly and didn't answer. The concubine Xian Zhao was stunned for a moment. She seemed to smile generously and sat down opposite the Empress Dowager. Everyone sat down, but only the Empress Dowager, Li Shi, stood alone in the middle of the study, not knowing what to do. Since Mo Suyun ascended the throne and became the Empress Dowager, Li Shi had been staying in her own palace. Not to mention that everything in the palace was controlled by the Empress Dowager. Even though she knew that her son had been abused by Mo Jingli, she did not dare to say a word for her son. Now that she was suddenly brought to the Li Palace by the guards, Madame Li was at a loss. She did not know how she had offended Prince Li. Mo Jingli stared at Li Shi with a gloomy expression. Li Shi's face turned paler and paler, and her body seemed to be on the verge of collapse. The Empress Dowager frowned and coughed lightly. Li Wang, why did you ask someone to bring Madame Li to the Li Palace? In the end, Madame Li is your imperial brother's widow. It's not a good thing for her to stay in your estate for too long. Mo Jingli snorted and stared at Mrs. Li. I asked you a question, you better answer truthfully. Madame Li nodded her head in fright. Mo Jingli faintly asked, when was the emperor born? Madame Li was stunned. She did not expect that Mo Jingli would ask such a strange question. Mo Jingli coldly said, you better think clearly before returning to I. Madame Li was frightened by his gloomy expression. She could not help but take a step back and said with a trembling voice, replying to Prince, the emperor was born in the 12th year of Emperor Jing, on the 2nd day of the 9th month. Doesn't Prince know about this? A prince's birthday was recorded in the imperial family's genealogy. If Prince Li wanted to know, he could just ask someone to look through the Jade Archive. Mo Jingli snorted. Mo Suyun was born on the 2nd day of the 9th month, while Yi Ying's child was born on the 30th day of the 8th month. The difference was less than 3 days. The Empress Dowager was slightly stunned. She seemed to have thought of something. She looked at Mo Jingli and said, why is Prince Li asking about the emperor's birthday now? Mo Jingli acted as if he did not hear the Empress Dowager's words. His gaze did not move away from Madame Li at all. He continued to ask, after Mo Suyun was born, did you see him? Madame Li nodded with some fear, my body is not bad. I didn't faint. So, after the emperor was born, the palace maids brought him to me to see. Very good, Mo Jingli nodded with satisfaction. From what I know, the emperor should have been born at full term. Why did the imperial physician tell I that the emperor was born prematurely because he was born prematurely? In fact, the imperial physician did not say that Imo Su-yun was born prematurely. He only said that Imo Su-yun was born prematurely because he was born prematurely. At that time, Madame Li was not favored. If she did not give birth to a little prince and Imo Jingqi did not pass the throne to him, the people in and out of the palace would have forgotten about this pair of mother and son. Who would care if Imo Su-yun was born prematurely? Madame Li's face paled. She did not dare to speak. Imo Jingli's eyes turned cold. He heavily slapped the armrest, and the sturdy rosewood armrest shattered, still not telling the truth. Madame Li said in panic, "I don't know. I don't know what to say, the emperor is really my son." Imo Jingli sneered, "Is that so? Someone come, drag this woman out and kill her." "Your Majesty!" The Empress Dowager glared at Imo Jingli in shock and anger. She finally understood what Imo Jingli wanted to do. She angrily said, "Madame Li is the emperor's birth mother. How can you kill her just like that? If you kill the Empress Dowager, how will King Li explain it to the court?" Imo Jingli sneered and looked at the Empress Dowager. "If Imo Su-yun is not the son of the late emperor, who will I explain it to?" "No. Prince is innocent." Madame Li was shocked. Even the stupidest person would know what crime it was to confuse the royal bloodline. Madame Li's legs went soft and she immediately fell to the ground. "Prince is innocent. Chinchia is innocent." She had lived a peaceful life. She had never thought that she would become the emperor's concubine. She also never thought that she would give birth to a prince. She also never thought that she would one day become the Empress Dowager. She never thought that after this series of events that made her panic, there would be something like this waiting for her. "Since you don't want to tell the truth, then go die." Imo Jingli's voice was cold and emotionless. "No. I don't want to. I really don't know." Madame Li cried out, "It's not my fault." Emperor! Emperor, old consort Xian Zhao, who had been silent all this time, frowned. Looking at Li Shi, who was so scared that she was incoherent, she suddenly said, "You just need to make it clear whether the emperor is your son or not." Madame Li was stunned for a moment. She looked at the three people in the seat and finally said timidly, I don't know. When the emperor was born, I wrapped him up. When he was 1 month old, the late emperor had someone bring the child to him. After the child was brought back, his health was not good. I thought that the child would get sick easily, so I didn't care." "Stupid!" The Empress Dowager angrily said, "The child is 1 month old. You still don't know whether the child you brought back is your own child or not. A 1-month-old baby had already grown. How could she tell what he looked like?" Madame Li bit her pale lips and did not dare to speak. The virtuous consort's eyes flashed with understanding. She faintly said to Imo Jingli, "Emperor, she doesn't know much. Let her go back. After all, she is the Empress Dowager." Chapter 919. Imo Jingli originally still had questions to ask. Even if he finished, he didn't plan on leaving Li Shi alive. But he had always respected the virtuous consort and didn't want to go against her wishes, so he nodded and let people take Li Shi out. Only the Empress Dowager, Imo Jingli, and the virtuous consort were left in the study. The Empress Dowager frowned and said, "Mimi, what do you mean?" The virtuous consort sighed faintly and said, "This matter can't be blamed on Li Shi. She was just a low-ranking consort with a palace-made background. The child was taken away by the late emperor himself. Even if she knew that the child wasn't the original one, how could she dare to say it? If she said it, not only would the child be gone, she would also lose her life." The virtuous consort's words were very calm, but for some reason, the Empress Dowager felt that there was a hidden meaning in her words. A strange expression flashed across her face. Turning her head to look at Imo Jingli, she sneered and said, "Since it's like this, Li Wang must know the emperor's identity. What does Li Wang want to do now?" Staring at Imo Jingli, the Empress Dowager's heart suddenly felt a strange pleasure. Of course, she knew what Mo Jingli wanted to do. But even though she could barely protect herself now, she had no power to interfere with Mo Jingli's decision. But now, if Mo Jingli became Mo Su-yun's son, she wanted to know what decision her son would make. Mo Jingli said indifferently, "This matter has nothing to do with the Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager, please return to the palace to rest." "You!" The Empress Dowager couldn't help but be furious. But facing the virtuous consort's indifferent smile, she didn't know why she swallowed her anger. Snorting, she turned and left the study. Leave her. In the study, the virtuous consort looked at the ugly expression on Mo Jingli's face and called out softly, "This matter is Mu Fei's fault. It's fine. I'll have the Tai treat the emperor. There is still hope. In the end, the emperor is your only son." Mo Jingli was silent for a long time and said, "This has nothing to do with Mu Fei. Mu Fei is thinking for Ken. Let Ken think about it." Xian Zhao old concubine nodded and stood up, "Then Mu Fei will go back first, don't think too much. His Majesty will be fine. Mother, take care." Old consort Xian Zhao turned and walked out. When she reached the door, she looked back at Mo Jingli, who was sitting behind the desk with his head down and thinking about something. A faint smile appeared at the corner of her lips, which still retained her charm. In the small courtyard where Yi Ying was temporarily staying, Yi Ying sat alone in the room in a daze. Her beautiful eyes were red and swollen from her tears, and her pale and haggard face no longer had the graceful bearing of the #1 beauty of the Chu capital. All of a sudden, the door was kicked open from the outside with a bang. Yi Ying raised her head to look at the door in a daze. Mo Jingli stood at the door and stared at the woman inside with a cold aura. However, Yi Ying could not see the expression on his face clearly because of the light. Seeing Mo Jingli, Yi Ying seemed to come back to her senses. She hurriedly jumped down from the bed and threw herself in front of Mo Jingli, crying, "Prince, child, my child. I beg you to save Suyun." Seeing Yi Ying's disheveled appearance, Mo Jingli's eyes flashed with a trace of disgust. He grabbed her hand and pulled her into the room and threw her to the ground. He stared at Yi Ying condescendingly and said, "Yi Ying, who told you Mo Suyun's identity?" Yi Ying bit her lips and refused to speak. Mo Jingli was furious and pulled her up from the ground. Still not speaking. Mo Jingli would never believe that Yi Ying found out by herself. Yi Ying had never seen that child, so how would she know whether Mo Suyun was that child or not? Naturally, it was someone else who told her. This also meant that someone else knew Mo Suyun's true identity, or even, this could be a trap. A person with ulterior motives used the news of his son's disappearance to set up a flawless trap. "You think I can't take care of you if you don't speak?" Seeing Yi Ying's stubborn appearance, Mo Jingli did not have the slightest bit of pity in his heart. Leaning close to Yi Ying's ear, Mo Jingli whispered, "Yi Ying, do you believe that I can let I kill Mo Suyun right now?" "Bastard!" Yi Ying finally could not help but change her expression. She glared fiercely at Mo Jingli and scolded angrily, "He's your biological son." At the same time, she reached out to grab Mo Jingli's face. Mo Jingli raised his hand and easily suppressed her, "Are you going to speak or not?" Yi Ying gritted her teeth and said, "Mo Jingli, Suyun is also your son." Mo Jingli stared at her, suddenly laughed, and said faintly, "If I want a son, I will naturally have one. Moreover, even if I save Mo Suyun, he will be a sickly person in the future." Mo Jingli said this deliberately to scare Yi Ying. But the moment the words left his mouth, he suddenly had a feeling of realization. That's right, he will have a son in the future. Although none of the women in the residence had spread the news yet, the imperial physician also said that it was because he had been poisoned for too long and needed to be recuperated. However, the poison in his body had truly been cured. As long as he was given time, he will naturally have another child. There was no need to look after such a weak, incompetent, and sickly son and bring trouble upon himself. In addition, Mo Jingli really did not treat Mo Suyun well these few years. So, Ever since he confirmed in his heart that Mo Suyun was his missing son. Mo Jingli could not help but feel a trace of guilt and discomfort in his heart. But more than that, it was a kind of anger from being played by Mo Jingqi before his death. So in his heart, he was not very willing to see his son who had been recovered. And Mo Suyun's identity was really not easy to deal with. It was troublesome whether he acknowledged it or not. Of course, Mo Jingli was even more unwilling to let Mo Suyun continue to stay on the throne. Although with Mo Suyun, he could be considered as a retired emperor. But how could the title of retired emperor be better than emperor? Yi Ying looked at Mo Jingli in shock. She originally thought that Mo Jingli was just unwilling to believe her words. She did not expect Mo Jingli to say such heartless words. But she quickly understood. She only had Mo Suyun as a son, but Mo Jingli could have more sons from other people. Now, Mo Suyun's existence was simply blocking Mo Jingli's path. Speak or not? Mo Jingli asked leisurely. I'll speak. Yi Ying closed her eyes in despair and said painfully. Sparkling tears fell from the corners of her eyes, but it did not arouse the slightest pity from the man in front of her. Yi Li said in a trembling voice, "It was the people from the Prince Ding mansion who told me." What did you say? Mo Jingli said sternly. Now that the Dechu state had formed an alliance with the Xiling northern tribes, it could be considered as officially opposing the Prince Ding mansion. So Mo Jingli was even more sensitive to the news of the Prince Ding mansion. Once he heard Yi Ying say that the Prince Ding mansion was involved in this matter, how could he not be angry? Since she had already said it, Yi Ying no longer had any scruples. She gritted her teeth and said, I said that the Prince Ding mansion told me Suyun's identity. Bitch! Mo Jingli slapped Yi Ying's face hard. You actually dared to collude with the Prince Ding mansion behind Ai's back. How dare you? Yi Ying said with tears in her eyes, I just want to find my son. What's wrong with that? As long as the Prince Ding mansion can help me find my son, why can't I help them? Mo Jingli leaned over and pulled Yi Ying up. Tell me, what news did you tell the Prince Ding mansion? Who do you usually contact? How do you pass the news? Chapter 920. Yi Ying was not someone who could handle it. Mo Jingli only needed to spend a little effort to get Yi Ying to summon a maidservant who usually served by her side, as well as a few guards and a housekeeper. They were all people from Prince Ding's residence. It was a pity that by the time Mo Jingli sent people to capture these people, they had already escaped without a trace. In Yi Ying's room, Mo Jingli sat in a chair and stared at Yi Ying, who was sitting on the ground with injuries all over her body. Yi Ying endured the pain and said, I have told you everything I should tell you, Suyun. Mo Jingli said indifferently, Suyun is the late emperor's prince, not your son. Yi Ying was stunned and stared at Mo Jingli in disbelief. Mo Jingli frowned and said, the Prince Ding mansion lied to you. When he said this, Mo Jingli had already decided to abandon this son. Not only because of the throne, but also because of the knot in his heart towards Suyun. It was also because this news came from the Prince Ding mansion. Mo Jingli could not help but suspect that this news itself was a conspiracy, and that his missing child had already been killed by Mo Jingqi. Since he had not been found for so many years, why not pretend that he never had this son? No! Yi Ying shook her head fiercely. No, the Prince Ding mansion would not lie to me about this. I know. Suyun and my child are only 3 days apart, how could it be so coincidental? I know, you just brought Madame Li out of the palace to ask. She must know, I will ask her. As she said this, she stood up and walked out. Stop! Mo Jingli said coldly, the Empress Dowager is not feeling well and has already returned to the palace to rest. You also stay in the mansion for the time being. And now that I have no time to deal with you, you better know your place. No. Jingli. Yi Ying was stunned and shook her head in horror. Suddenly, she ran to Mo Jingli and knelt down. She hugged his leg and cried, Jingli, you know that Suyun is our child. I beg you, let him go. He's your child and your only child now. Looking at Yi Ying's tearful appearance, Mo Jingli's expression softened a little. He raised his hand to touch Yi Ying's hair and said in a low voice, he's congenitally deficient and didn't take good care of himself. He didn't have long to live anyway. Be good and we'll have other children in the future. No. No way. Yi Ying shook her head. Suddenly, Mo Jingli felt a sharp pain in his scalp. He pulled Yi Ying's hair and made her look at him. He said calmly, yes, as long as you're obedient. When I ascend the throne, I will make you my empress. Yi Ying's eyeballs moved as she muttered softly, make me empress? Mo Jingli nodded and said, yes, as long as you're obedient. I don't care about your previous contact with the Prince Ding mansion, but, you have to help I do one thing. Do you know any other spies from the Prince Ding mansion in Nanjing City? It's definitely not just in the Prince Ding mansion. I really don't know. Yi Ying lowered her eyes. Mo Jingli said softly, think about it again. I know that I didn't treat you well before. But you see, you're the only one in the mansion now. In the end, you're still the only princess consort of princely mansion, right? How did those people send the news out? I remember that those people can't go out of the city at will. They naturally have other people to contact them, right? Half an hour later, Mo Jingli walked out of Yi Ying's room with satisfaction. The guards who were originally guarding outside Yi Ying's courtyard also withdrew. In the room, Yi Ying sat on the ground in a daze. After a long time, a bleak smile appeared on her lips. Mo Jingli, you're so cruel. In that case, don't blame me. Long before Mo Jingli came to find her, the shadow guards who were originally following Yi Ying and in the Prince Ding mansion in the princely mansion had already withdrawn. Before leaving, they left a few words for Yi Li, 70% true and 30% false. If you want to save Mo Suyun, you'd better know what to say and what not to say. This time, Yi Ying did a good job. Mo Jingli only knew a few unimportant spies in Nanjing City. And most of them had probably withdrawn by now. But Yi Ying did not reveal any of the really important things. She did not know if Yi Li could save her son. Mo Jingli was right, that child would not live long at all. And this was all because of her as a mother. Because she also coveted the vanity of the high and mighty empress, she knew that the virtuous consort dowager poisoned the child. Not only did she not stop it, she did not even tell anyone in the Prince Ding mansion. It was she who harmed him. Yi Li said that she would regret it. She had never regretted it like now. Now, she only hoped that someone could avenge her son. Mo Jingli said that there would be other children. No, she would never have another child. Even if there was, it would never be this one. Chapter 921. Yi Ying seemed to have accepted her fate. She no longer cried for Mo Jingli to let Mo Suyun go. Mo Jingli did not care about her anymore. Mo Jingli actually looked down on Yi Ying. 10 years ago, Mo Jingli's love for Yi Ying was so strong that he did not hesitate to break off the marriage arranged by the late emperor. He was hated by the Su family. Although there were some political reasons, it could not be ignored that Mo Jingli really liked Yi Ying at that time. But 10 years later, the coldness, contempt, and disgust were worlds apart. Especially when there was Yi Li as a comparison, Mo Jingli felt that he had more reasons to despise Yi Ying. Cowardly, incompetent, selfish, stupid. Many times, Mo Jingli even suspected that he must have been possessed and thought that Yi Li was more suitable to be the princess consort than Yi Ying. Even if she was still known as the daughter of the third family, Mo Jingli felt that Yi Li at that time would not be more stupid than Yi Ying now. So Mo Jingli did not think that Yi Ying could do anything earth-shattering, so he was not in a hurry to punish Yi Ying. He even slightly relaxed the restrictions on her because she was sensible. After all, a princess consort had just gone missing in the Prince Li's mansion. It would not look good if something happened to the remaining one. But he forgot that sometimes, he would have to pay a heavy price for looking down on women. So, after removing a few of the Prince Ding mansion spies in Jiangnan, Mo Jingli, who was full of himself, naturally forgot that Mo Suyun might be his son. He continued to prepare for the most glorious life that was about to come. Although Yi Ying got her freedom, she was restricted from leaving the mansion. And the people who served her were replaced by Mo Jingli's people. Yi Ying seemed to have given up her previous madness and persistence. She only begged Mo Jingli to allow her to visit Mo Suyun occasionally. Mo Jingli was not without any guilt towards his son. In the end, he agreed to Yi Ying's request. On this day, Yi Ying went to Mo Suyun's temporary residence with the soup that she had personally cooked, just like the previous 2 days. It just so happened that the imperial physician was taking Mo Suyun's pulse. Xian Zhao Grand Concubine's health had improved a lot in the past 2 days, and she often came to take care of Mo Suyun personally. Yi Ying stopped in her tracks when she heard consort Xian Zhao's voice before she entered the room. Inside, concubine Xian Zhao asked, "Imperial physician, how is the emperor's health?" The imperial physician pondered for a moment before replying, reporting to Grand Imperial Concubine, "This humble official is also a bit puzzled. The emperor's health seems to be improving." Hearing this, Yi Ying's heart skipped a beat. Her slender fingers involuntarily gripped the food box in her hand tightly. After a moment of silence, old concubine Xian Zhao asked, "Is it because of the princess?" "It shouldn't be. This official has checked the soup sent by the princess consort, but it's all ordinary soup. Not to mention curing the emperor's illness, even the nourishing effect is limited." The imperial physician denied concubine Xian Zhao's guess. Concubine Xian Zhao hesitated for a moment before finally asking, "Then, in your opinion, the emperor's current health?" The imperial physician whispered, replying to Grand Imperial Concubine, "Although the emperor's health has improved slightly, it is extremely difficult for him to recover. If he is careful in everything and carefully nurtures himself, he may be able to live for a few more years. Otherwise." But in this short period of time, the imperial physician was in a difficult position. He was the confidant of Princely and concubine Xian Zhao, so he naturally understood what they meant. However, with the emperor's current health, although he could not live for long, it would not be a problem for him to drag on for a year or so. Unless they gave him a strong medicine. Thinking of this, the imperial physician could not help but tremble and did not dare to continue thinking. There were some things that the master could think about, but the people working under him could not think too much about it. Concubine Xian Zhao was silent for a moment before sighing, "Forget it, I will discuss it with Princely again." Outside the door, Yi Ying tightly held the food box in her hand. Her half-closed eyes seemed to be dipped in poison. That old woman. That old woman, since the day she entered the door, she had been torturing her. Now, she was actually discussing these things with others in front of her son. Even if Su Yun might not understand. Even if, gritting her teeth, Yi Ying restrained the hatred on her face and stepped into the room. Concubine Xian Zhao frowned and said, "When did you come?" Yi Ying blinked her eyes and said doubtfully, "This daughter-in-law came to see the emperor." "What's the matter, Grand Imperial Concubine?" Concubine Xian Zhao stared at Yi Ying suspiciously. Since Yi Ying was certain of Mo Suyun's identity, she would definitely not be indifferent to him. After looking for a long time, she only saw Yi Ying's calm and respectful expression. She said, "It's nothing. Since you are here, accompany the emperor. I am a little tired, so I will go back to rest first." Yi Ying respectfully said, "Send off Grand Imperial Concubine." After sending off concubine Xian Zhao, the imperial physician also packed up his things and left. Yi Ying sat by the bed and looked at the child who was lying on the bed with a blank expression. She felt her nose sour and tears almost flowed out. "Su. Emperor, I brought your favorite chicken soup. Come and drink some, okay?" Yi Ying said softly. Mo Suyun looked at Yi Ying's eyes and suddenly said, "You are Princess Consort Li." Yi Ying was delighted. 2 days ago, Mo Suyun was so sick that he could not even recognize people. He was just in a daze. She did not expect that he would recognize her today. It seemed that the imperial physician was right. He had indeed improved a lot. Yi Ying carefully picked him up and sat against the pillow. While delivering the chicken soup to his mouth, she asked softly, "Does the emperor want anything? I will find someone to buy it for the emperor." Mo Suyun blinked his eyes and hesitated for a moment before whispering, "Jinwan's brother by Yi and beautiful sister." Yi Ying was stunned. Mo Suyun had not recovered from his serious illness. If she was not sitting close to him, she would not have heard what he said. Mo Suyun thought that she did not know. He raised his hand and pointed at his arm that had not yet scabbed, "Brother." Then he took out a small brown pill from an inconspicuous small bag beside him, "Sister." Yi Ying's heart trembled slightly. She looked around vigilantly. Although there were palace maids and eunuchs in the room, they were all standing outside. She could not see anything through the screen and curtains. Yi Ying naturally did not know that the sister Mo Suyun was talking about was Yun Gu. She only thought that it was Yi Li who had changed back into women's clothing. She whispered, "Sister gave it to you?" Mo Suyun slowly nodded. "Brother said that I cannot tell others." "Princess can." The brother he was talking about was Qin Feng. Yi Ying carefully hid the small bag for him. She lovingly looked at Mo Suyun's confused expression and softly said, "Don't worry. If you like it, I will definitely find it for you." "What does the emperor like? What does he want you to find?" Mo Jingli's voice came from the door. Yi Ying was shocked. She quickly stood up and forced a smile. "The emperor said that he wants to eat honey sauce chicken. Heard that there is a restaurant in the east of the city that makes honey sauce chicken. That's why I asked someone to buy it for the emperor." Mo Jingli did not comment. He glanced at the two and said, "Is that so?" Chapter 922. Yi Ying carefully clenched her fingers in her sleeves. She was worried that Mo Suyun would spill the beans. However, she saw Mo Suyun looking at Mo Jingli in fear. His small body shrank inwards, but he did not speak. Mo Jingli had long been used to this kind of situation. These 2 years, Mo Suyun had always been like this when he saw him. However, his identity was different now. In the past, he only felt pleasure and disgust when he saw him. Now, there was a complicated and indescribable feeling and a faint anger. Such a cowardly child, how could he be Mo Jingli's child? Mo Jingli faintly moved his eyes away and said, "Since the emperor likes to eat it, I will send someone to invite the chef of Due restaurant to the Fu to specially cook it for the emperor." Yi Ying nodded and said softly, "Prince, you can make the decision." Mo Jingli nodded with satisfaction. He glanced at the half-drunk chicken soup and said, "Let the emperor rest well. I will send you back to your room." "Yes." Yi Ying looked at Mo Suyun, who seemed to be in a daze, with some reluctance. Then, she followed Mo Jingli and walked out. Just as they left Mo Suyun's courtyard, someone hurried over and said, reporting to Prince, "Just now, Mistress Yang of the side courtyard sent news that she is 1.5 months pregnant." "What?" Mo Jingli froze and was immediately overjoyed. He did not have time to accompany Yi Ying back. He laughed loudly and said, "Great reward. Pass down I's decree, promote Zhao as a side consort." "Yes, Prince." "Congratulations, Prince." The person who reported the news also had a happy face. After all, this was the only child of the Li Palace. Prince was in a good mood. Naturally, he would not miss out on the previous time. Mo Jingli waved his hand and said, "Forget it. I will go and see for myself." After that, he seemed to have forgotten Yi Ying, who was beside him, and strode towards the side courtyard. At the door, Yi Ying looked back at the courtyard door. She lowered her eyes and silently walked towards her own courtyard. In an inconspicuous courtyard in Nanjing, Su Qingchen and Yi Li sat in the courtyard and played chess. Yunge sat by the side and curiously watched the two of them fight back and forth. Her eyes were filled with worship and admiration when she looked at Yi Li. Yi Li helplessly looked at the little girl and shook her head with a smile. Yungu did not know how to play chess. She only saw that she was forcing Su Qingchen to retreat step by step. She did not know that she would most likely lose to Su Qingchen in the end. Against Su Qingchen, it didn't matter what kind of plan he used, it was useless. Therefore, it was better to fight quickly. Young Master Qingchen, Princess Consort. Qin Feng, who was wearing an inconspicuous cotton robe, appeared in the courtyard and bowed. Su Qingchen stopped the chess piece in his hand. Looking at Qin Feng's attire, he couldn't help but laugh. Governor Qin, you truly look like whatever you are dressed up as. If I met you on the street, I might not be able to recognize you. Su Qingchen's words were indeed true. Don't look at Qin Feng's usual aura that made people not dare to be presumptuous. But at this time, wearing this cloth, the aura around his body was restrained. Even his originally handsome face looked much more ordinary. His whole person blended into the crowd and probably would not attract anyone's attention. Such a person was not only suitable to be a shadow guard, but also suitable to be a spy and an assassin. Qin Feng smiled faintly and said, "Young master, you flatter me." Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "To be able to force you to dress up like this, it seems that Mo Jingli is really angry." Qin Feng said, "These days, although there is nothing on the surface in Nanjing, the secret investigation is still very tight. After Mo Jingli overturned a few strongholds, the people he caught were all people who did not know anything. He is probably unwilling." Yi Li nodded with satisfaction and said, "It seems that Yi Ying is not completely stupid and did not give up Yaoji. In fact, telling Yi Ying about Mo Jingli's identity was a bit dangerous, but if she really used Mo Suyun to kill Yi Ying and Mo Jingli, Yi Li would not be able to get over the hurdle in her heart. After all, she was also the mother of 3 children. As long as she thought of the cute and naughty Mo Xiaobao in Glass City and the pair of twins who were left at home before they were 1 year old, Yi Li could not help but soften. Although she did not believe in ghosts and gods, she still hoped to be able to feel at ease. In the words of her grandfather, it was not about retribution of ghosts and gods. Scholars had always believed in ghosts and gods. But if the method was too vicious, it would be harmful. Fortunately, Yi Ying did not let her down. If Yi Ying gave up Yaoji, the Prince Ding Mansion's information channel in Nanjing would be destroyed. At that time, even she would not be able to do anything. The Prince Ding Mansion could not send people to barge into the Li Palace, right? Is there any movement in the Li Palace? Yi Li asked. Qin Feng said, Mo Jingli and concubine Xian Zhao already know that Mo Suyun will not die in a short period of time. They are hesitating whether to use a ruthless drug. At this point, Qin Feng could not help but frown. His contempt for Mo Jingli was obvious. Even a vicious tiger would not eat its cubs, not to mention a child who did not know anything. If Mo Jingli really did this, he was not even human. Yi Li frowned slightly, looked at Su Qingchen and asked, "Big brother, what kind of decision do you think Mo Jingli will make?" Su Qingchen sighed softly, slowly put down a piece and said, "Is there someone in the Li Palace who is pregnant?" Qin Feng was stunned. How did Gongzi know? Li Palace's concubine Zhao just spread the news that she is pregnant for 1.5 months. Su Qingchen did not answer Yi Li's question, only saying, "Li, if you want to save Mo Suyun, do it as soon as possible." Big brother's meaning is? Yi Li was stunned. Although she did not think that Mo Jingli would give up the throne for his son, she did not think that Mo Jingli would kill Mo Suyun after knowing the truth. After all, although it was troublesome, it was not impossible to solve it, right? Su Qingchen said indifferently, if it was just Mo Jingli alone, he might not kill Mo Suyun. But I am afraid, there is someone else who wants to kill Mo Suyun. Coincidentally, at this time, there is news of a child. To Mo Suyun, it is definitely not a good thing. Yi Li sighed faintly and said, "Forget it, I will personally make a trip to the Li Palace tonight." Qin Feng was a little worried and said, "Princess, if there is anything you want us to do, we will do it. Why does Princess have to personally take the risk? Yili shook her head and said, Yi Ying will not believe you. I will be more assured if I go. In the dead of night, Yi Ying was still unable to sleep. She was restlessly pacing back and forth in the room like a trapped beast. Only now did she understand how powerless she was after losing the secret help of the Prince Ding mansion. Under Mo Jingli's order, she could not even mobilize anyone in the Prince mansion. Not to mention passing any news out. Although she was not very smart, she understood a lot of things these days. Mo Jingli's concubine was pregnant, so her son had no way to live. But now, she couldn't even kill Zhao Shi if she wanted to. No, she did not want to kill anyone now. She only hoped that her son could live on peacefully. Chapter 923. Fourth Sister. Yi Li's voice came faintly in the quiet night. Yi Ying was startled. She suddenly turned around and saw Yi Li standing not far behind her, dressed in black. Beside Yi Li were Qin Feng and Wei Lin, as well as a little girl she had never seen before. Yungu curiously poked her head out to look at Yi Ying, then turned back to look at Yi Li. Originally, Yi Li did not plan to bring Yungu along tonight, but Yungu insisted on seeing that sickly little brother, so Yi Li had no choice but to bring her along. In any case, Yun Ji's martial arts were quite good, at least it was not a problem for her to protect herself. Yungu blinked, somewhat puzzled. Why did Sister Li's sister not look like her at all? Third sister. Yi Ying had never been so excited to see Yi Li. Almost immediately, she threw herself in front of Yi Li, her legs went soft, and she knelt down. Third sister, I beg you to save Suyun. I beg you. I'll do whatever you want me to do. Yi Li sighed faintly, reached out and pulled her up. If you knew this would happen, why did you do it in the first place? Yi Ying was inexplicably ashamed. It was all because of her narrow-mindedness and suspicion. She was afraid that Yi Li would play tricks on her, so she insisted that Yi Li tell her the child's whereabouts first. Now that she had fallen to this point, she still needed Yi Li to save her. Her knows she was wrong. Third sister, I beg you to save Suyun. No matter what third sister says in the future, her will never suspect third sister again. I beg you, for father's sake, save Suyun. All right. Yi Li interrupted her incoherent words, nodded and said, I'm going to take Mo Suyun away from here. Do you want to leave together? Yi Ying was silent. Yi Li did not care what she was thinking. She had some sympathy for Mo Suyun, but not for Yi Ying. She only said indifferently, think carefully, once Mo Suyun goes missing in the Li Palace. It doesn't matter if it has anything to do with you, Mo Jingli won't let you off. After a long silence, Yi Ying finally shook her head and said, no, I won't leave. Third sister, I know. I have wronged you in the past. I only ask you for one thing. Help me send Suyun to my parents and ask them to take care of Suyun for the sake of this unfilial daughter. I know. His body has already been completely destroyed by Mo Jingli and that vicious old concubine Xian Zhao. Let him live as long as he can. I only hope that he can suffer less and live a few years of peace and safety. At least I didn't waste my time in this world. What are you trying to do? Yi Li frowned. Yi Ying smiled faintly and said, Third sister, are you concerned about me? Don't worry. I won't act recklessly. Yi Li was silent for a moment. Then, she nodded and said, as you wish. Yi Ying took a deep breath and said, let's go. Let me take one last look at him. You guys, take him away. Yi Ying left her courtyard. Yi Li and the others were still hiding in the dark. Now, after so many years, there was finally a happy occasion in the Li Palace. The entire residence was filled with laughter. It was obvious that Mo Jingli was holding a banquet. However, it made Yi Ying's quiet courtyard seem especially deserted. Yi Ying walked into Mo Suyun's courtyard. However, when she entered the room was empty. Yi Ying was anxious. She quickly called out, "Someone come." Soon, someone came in. When they saw Yi Ying, they were stunned. "Princess? Where's His Majesty?" Yi Ying said angrily. "His Majesty? His Majesty was invited by the prince to attend a banquet." "Nonsense." Yi Ying said, "His Majesty is seriously ill. How could he attend a banquet?" The servant was shocked when she saw Yi Ying's red eyes. She quickly said, "It's true. His Majesty was carried there." Yi Ying was anxious. She was too lazy to pay attention to the servant. She rushed out of the courtyard and went to the main hall where Mo Jingli was holding the banquet. At this time, the main hall was filled with singing and dancing. Mo Jingli sat on the main seat and drank to his heart's content. Beside him was naturally the newly pregnant concubine Zhao. On his right sat concubine Xian Zhao. On his left, Mo Su-yun sat alone in a chair. He did not watch the singing and dancing below, nor did he eat the food on the table. It was as if he did not know anything about the outside world. Those sitting below were naturally Mo Jingli's confidants. Mu Yang and Yao Ji were also sitting in the hall. A few days ago, Mu Yang spoke up for Chu Junwei. When Chu Junwei disappeared, Mu Yang was severely scolded by Mo Jingli. Therefore, he was a bit low-key today. However, looking at Li Wang's expression, Mu Yang knew that Li Wang would soon get what he wanted. When the time came, Marquis Mu Yang's residence, who had the merit of supporting the emperor, would naturally not be hated by Li Wang for such a small matter. Yaoji glanced at the dazed Mo Su-yun in the hall. A trace of hidden worry flashed through her eyes. Congratulations to Prince for having a son. Everyone in the hall raised their cups and congratulated him. Mo Jingli nodded in satisfaction and said, "Thanks to everyone's auspicious words. Let us all drink a cup." Concubine Zhao, who was sitting beside Mo Jingli, suddenly smiled and said, "The emperor hasn't eaten anything all night. Although the emperor is young and does not know how to drink, there is no harm in drinking some fruit juice. How about inviting the emperor to drink a cup with everyone?" Concubine Xian Zhao glanced at Concubine Zhao and nodded in satisfaction, saying, "Concubine Zhao is right. There are so many of us chatting and laughing, but we have neglected the emperor. Why aren't you pouring fruit juice for the emperor? What is wrong with you servants?" The Taijian standing behind Mo Su-yun shouted that they did not dare. He went forward and picked up the wine pot in front of Mo Su-yun and poured a cup for Mo Su-yun. A gentle smile appeared on Concubine Zhao's beautiful lips. She looked at Mo Su-yun with a smile and said, "Qinxia is pregnant with Prince's child. Isn't the emperor happy for Qinxia and Prince?" Mo Su-yun's eyes moved but he did not speak. He only looked at Mo Jingli who was sitting beside Concubine Zhao. His eyes were still filled with fear. Mo Jingli said faintly, "Since Concubine Zhao has said so, Emperor, you should also drink a cup to congratulate Concubine Zhao." Everyone in the hall agreed. Yaoji sat beside Mu Yang with a perfect smile on her lips. She was even more beautiful than the young and gentle Concubine Zhao in the hall. She just looked coldly at the absurd scene in front of her and smiled coldly in her heart. When she looked at the man beside her, her heart was filled with deep disappointment and indifference. Even a woman like Yaoji could guess that the so-called fruit juice was not as simple as just fruit juice. How could Mu Yang not know? What's more, Mo Su-yun was the emperor in the end. The officials in this hall forced the emperor of a country to toast for a concubine who did not have an official concubine Zhao. Marquis Mu Yang Fu had military generals for generations. But the current Mu Yang was even more adept at flattering and monopolizing power than the civil officials. Mu Yang couldn't do the same for the matter of remonstrating with force. Many years ago, he was no longer the carefree and unyielding young man she knew back then. Seeing that Mo Su-yun did not move, Mo Jingli's face darkened. He said, "Serve the emperor to drink." The Taijian at the side could only personally pick up the wine cup and bring it to Mo Su-yun's lips. "Mo Jingli, you dare!" Outside the hall, a sharp voice suddenly sounded. In an instant, even the original sound of the music stopped. Yi Ying's voice reverberated in the hall, appearing particularly loud. Chapter 924. Everyone looked back and saw Yi Ying walking in quickly with a frosty expression. She was still panting when she walked into the hall. It was obvious that she had run all the way here. Yi Ying rushed in and immediately rushed to the front of the hall. She knocked over the wine cup in front of Mo Su-yun. The strong aroma of the wine immediately filled the air. Yi Ying's expression was mournful. Mo Jingli, you are so vicious. Mo Jingli was taken aback by this sudden change. When he reacted, he frowned and said unhappily, "What nonsense are you making now? Why aren't you getting down yet?" "I'm doing it." Mo Jingli, you. Yi Ying was so angry that her face turned green. She wanted to expose Mo Jingli's trick but was pulled back by Zhao Sifei, who suddenly came forward. Concubine Zhao said with a gentle smile, "Sister Wang Fei, what are you doing?" The emperor refused to eat or drink anything for the entire night. Sister was afraid that he would be hungry and thirsty, so I asked him to drink a cup of fruit juice to moisten his throat. Yi Ying stared at her and said, "Oh? You wanted him to drink it?" Zhao Sifei was a little uncomfortable under her piercing gaze. Her smile was a little stiff. "Yes." Yi Ying sneered and said, "If that's the case, then you should drink some too." The smile on Zhao Sifei's face froze. She quickly took a step back and said with a smile, "Thank you, Sister Wang Fei, for your kindness. This concubine doesn't like to drink fruit juice." What a joke. How could she drink something like that now? Her body was precious now. Yi Ying said proudly, "I didn't ask if you liked to drink it. I gave it to you. It can't be that after drinking a cup of fruit juice, the thing in your stomach will disappear, right?" "Yi Ying, you're impudent." Mo Jingli was furious. He was over 30 years old, but he didn't have any children. He naturally had high expectations for Zhao Sifei's child. How could he tolerate Yi Ying's nonsense? Yi Ying squeezed out a sad smile and said, "Her child can't be said." "What about my child? Isn't Su-yun your son? For the throne, you want to kill your own son? Mo Jingli, you're not human. You're crazy." Mo Jingli gritted his teeth. "Men, drag this woman away for I." "How dare you? Mo Jingli, if you dare to harm my son, I won't let you off even if I become a ghost." Yi Ying cried out hoarsely. However, she was destined to be disappointed. The people sitting below her were all Mo Jingli's most trusted aides. They all hoped that Mo Jingli would be promoted to the top so that they could be credited with helping him succeed. Not to mention that Mo Su-yun was Mo Jingli's son. Even if Mo Su-yun was Mo Jingli's father, they wouldn't even bat an eye. Although they were all stunned by the sudden news, everyone was still thinking about how to deal with the aftermath of this matter. How could they let King Li not care about them knowing such a secret? Instead of upholding justice for the mother and son. "Take her away," Mo Jingli said in a deep voice. No one knew what she was thinking, but Yi Ying, who was being held by the guards, suddenly stopped struggling. She stared at Mo Jingli and said, "Prince, I still have something to tell you." Mo Jingli stared at her indifferently. Obviously, he didn't intend to listen to what she had to say. Yi Ying looked at him with a smile and said, "It's related to the Prince Ding mansion." "Prince, you don't want to hear it?" Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes and stared at Yi Ying. He wasn't sure how long Yi Ying had been hooking up with the Prince Ding mansion. At the same time, he wasn't sure if Yi Ying really knew some secrets about the Prince Ding mansion. After a long while, Mo Jingli said, "Let her come over." The guards let go of Yi Ying. Yi Ying didn't hurry to walk towards Mo Jingli. Instead, she turned and walked in front of Mo Su-yun. She reached out and carefully touched his thin little face, softly saying, "Su-yun, I'm sorry. Mother is sorry. In the future, you have to obediently listen to Big Brother and Big Sister, okay?" Mo Suyun blinked his eyes in confusion. He didn't understand why this princess consortly, who treated him so well, would say that she was his mother. Mother was clearly in the palace. Although Mother always ignored him, he couldn't have suddenly changed into another mother. Furthermore, seeing Mo Jingli's gloomy expression, Mo Suyun couldn't help but shrink back. Seeing her son's frightened appearance, Yi Ying bitterly shook her head. She turned and slowly walked in front of Mo Jingli. Looking at the man in front of her who was still handsome and full of the charm of a mature man, Yi Ying asked in a sad voice, "You, don't tell me you're not soft-hearted at all?" Mo Jingli coldly frowned and said, "I don't want to listen to your nonsense." "What do you want to say?" Yi Ying smiled helplessly. She leaned closer to Mo Jingli and whispered, "What I want to tell you is, my third sister has already arrived in Nanjing." Yi Ying rarely sincerely called Yi Li third sister. In front of Mo Jingli, most of the time, she directly called her by her name. Therefore, this third sister caused Mo Jingli's brain to pause for a moment before he reacted. "What did you say?" Yi Ying's smile was exceptionally joyful. Even her pale and thin face seemed to have added some radiance in an instant. She looked at Mo Jingli and giggled, "I said, my third sister. Princess Ding is currently in the Li Palace. Don't you know? Prince, be careful." In the instant that Mo Jingli was shocked, a frightened cry rang out beside him. Mo Jingli only felt a sharp pain in his abdomen. Reflexively, he slapped Yi Ying away. Although Mo Jingli was suddenly seriously injured and the force he used was not enough to take his life, Yi Ying could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. Coincidentally, she fell at the feet of Vice Consort Zhao. Yi Ying did not seem to care about her injury at all. It was as if she could not feel the pain. She hugged Vice Consort Zhao's legs and the two of them rolled down the hall in a heap. Their bodies rolled down the steps of the hall. After rolling down the hall, blood flowed faster from Yi Ying's lips. Vice Consort Zhao screamed and the floor below her was immediately dyed red. "Slut!" Mo Jingli was both shocked and angry. He covered the bleeding wound on his abdomen with one hand and sat back in the chair. He glared at Yi Ying with eyes full of undisguised murderous intent. "Li, quick! Call the grand physician." Virtuous Consort Zhao quickly went forward to support Mo Jingli. She shouted harshly, "Hurry and help Vice Consort Zhao up. The child, the child." Everyone's gaze landed on Vice Consort Zhao who was lying on the ground and crying. It was obvious that the child, who was only 1.5 months old, could not be saved. Everyone was stunned by this sudden turn of events. Who would have thought that Li Wangfei, who had always been quiet, would suddenly do such a shocking thing? In the blink of an eye, she had injured Li Wang and Vice Consort Zhao. She had even killed the child in Vice Consort Zhao's stomach. Mo Jingli sat in the chair, enduring the pain as he stared at Yi Ying below. Seeing the provocative smile on Yi Ying's face, the anger in his heart grew. He had never taken Yi Ying seriously. He always felt that compared to Yi Li, Yi Ying was not as stupid. She was selfish and cowardly. This kind of person naturally could not achieve great things. But he did not expect that someone like Yi Ying would injure him the most. In this life, Mo Jingli had never suffered such a great loss. And all of this was because of Yi Ying. Chapter 925. Perhaps it was because of the pain coming from his abdomen that Mo Jingli was irritated, or perhaps it was because of the sudden loss of the child that had just arrived. Mo Jingli stared at Yi Ying fiercely, a cruel light shooting out from his eyes. "Yi Ying, I want you to suffer a fate worse than death. You want to save Mo Suyun?" Mo Jingli stood up, ignoring the wounds on his body. He suddenly walked over quickly and grabbed Mo Suyun. Mo Suyun was already stunned by the situation in front of him. Suddenly being grabbed by the person he was most afraid of, he couldn't help but burst into tears. Yi Ying's face changed. "Mo Jingli, you're not human." Mo Jingli grinned, I will let you see what's called not human. After saying that, he threw Mo Suyun down from the main hall in front of everyone. Yang Sufei immediately miscarried when she rolled down the stairs. Not to mention that a weak child like Mo Suyun was thrown into the air by Mo Jingli and then smashed down. If he really fell to the ground, this child would really lose his life. A black silhouette swept in from outside the hall, and just happened to catch Mo Suyun in his hand. Mo Suyun was originally crying loudly, but after being thrown by Mo Jingli, his crying was suddenly stuck in his throat, and his little face began to turn green. Suddenly, a person broke into the main hall, causing everyone to be stunned. Looking closely, it was a very unfamiliar little girl. Although she was wearing black night clothes, the little girl's delicate face was full of anger. A pair of bright and beautiful eyes stared at Mo Jingli as if they were going to spit fire at any time. Xiao Yun, be good. Don't be afraid. Eat the candy. Yungu carefully put Mo Suyun on the ground, took out the prepared pills from his sleeve and stuffed them into Mo Suyun's mouth. He then hurriedly checked her pulse, and after confirming that there was no major problem for a while, he was relieved. He stood up and stared at Mo Jingli. Why are you so vicious? Xiao Yun is still so young, do you know that you almost killed him? Just as Mo Jingli flung Mo Suyun out, he pulled on the injury on his abdomen and sat back down. He looked at Yungu who was standing in the middle of the hall and said coldly, Who are you? Who are your accomplices? How dare you barge into the Prince Ding mansion at night? This girl had barged in from the main entrance, but none of the guards came in to report. If it wasn't for the fact that this lass's martial arts skills were so high that she was able to avoid the attention of all the imperial bodyguards, then there must be someone outside who had taken care of the imperial bodyguards for her. Yungu blinked and said unhappily, I don't even know you. Father said that I can't casually tell others my name. Everyone couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Li Wang's question was obviously very normal, but when this little girl said it, it immediately made people feel that Li Wang was like a playboy who took liberties with a woman from a good family. Miss, does Prince Li mean why are you here? Yaoji coughed lightly and said with a smile. Yungu was suddenly enlightened. She looked at Yaoji smilingly and said, Sister, you are so beautiful. I came with sisterly. Everyone present was shocked. Although Yi Ying had previously said that Yi Li was already here. But the sudden change that happened afterwards made everyone think that Yi Ying was deliberately mystifying in order to assassinate Mo Jingli. But they didn't expect that Yi Li had actually come to Jiangnan, and had even quietly entered the Li Palace. This also made the hearts of Mo Jingli's trusted subordinates turn cold. The people from Prince Ding's manor could easily enter Prince Li's manor under the situation where the entire city was under martial law. Therefore, it was naturally as easy as turning one's hand to take their lives. Yi Li! Come out right now! Mo Jingli roared sternly. Outside the door, Yi Li sighed with some regret. She walked in with Qin Feng and the others. Seeing Yi Li dressed in black with a calm expression, Mo Jingli was so angry that his eyes were bloodshot. Yi Li calmly interrupted his anger, Prince Li, you should treat your injuries first. Your concubine is still waiting for a doctor. Concubine Zhao had already been helped to a chair at the side to sit down. Even if the doctor hadn't arrived yet, she knew that this child couldn't be saved. She hated Yi Ying even more. Prince, you have to make a decision for Qinxie and the child. Yi Li glanced at her. Heaven's evil can be forgiven, but self-inflicted evil cannot be forgiven. Although they didn't come in, they heard clearly from outside. If it wasn't for concubine Zhao getting carried away and instigating Mo Jingli to attack Mo Suyun, she wouldn't have ended up being pulled down from the hall by Yi Ying and miscarried. Even if you are Princess Ding, this is the Li Palace's matter. Princess Ding, don't you think that you are meddling too much? Concubine Zhao glared at Yi Li with resentment. Ever since she entered the Li Palace, there wasn't a day that she didn't tremble in fear. First, she served concubine Xian Zhao, then she was constantly troubled by Princess Xixia. Later, there was Dong Fengyu who was even more difficult to deal with, so she could only live carefully with her tail between her legs. Now that she finally made a name for herself, she couldn't help but feel proud. Now, it was all for naught. Woo woo. Prince, Chinchia is wronged. Poor Chinchia and this unborn child. Your injuries aren't serious, you won't die. Seeing her crying so miserably, Yungu, who was squatting by the side to check on Yi Ying's injuries, raised her head and said, "Moreover, since you love your child, why did you harm Xiaoyun?" His body couldn't be saved after drinking the poisoned wine. Vice-consort Zhao's pitiful crying appearance was interrupted by Yungu and immediately became very comical. She opened her mouth and tears still hung on her face. Her originally beautiful face was twisted with green and purple. The imperial physician finally arrived. Yi Li and the others were not in a hurry to leave. Mo Jingli was helped in to bandage his wounds. Concubine Xian Zhao stayed in the hall and stared at Yi Li with a complicated expression. The officials below were secretly complaining in their hearts. Although everyone knew that Li Wang wanted to kill the emperor, and they didn't have any objections. But this was different from knowing that the emperor was Li Wang's son, and that Li Wang wanted to kill the emperor with his own hands. They were afraid that from now on, Li Wang would have a knot in his heart. "Princess Ding, why are you here?" Concubine Xian Zhao stared at Yi Li and asked. Yi Li smiled and said, "This concubine is presumptuous. Please forgive me, concubine. This concubine's elder brother, Qing Qinggongzi, went missing in the south a few days ago. This concubine specially came to find him. Coincidentally, I heard that my younger sister was being abused in the Li Palace, so I couldn't help but come to visit. But I didn't think." Concubine Xian Zhao couldn't help but choke. Yi Ying was Yi Li's Shu sister. This was an indisputable fact. No matter what the relationship between the two was like in private, as long as Yi Li said that she came to visit her wronged younger sister, no one could say a word. On the contrary, they had to praise Princess Ding as a loving sister. They wanted to say that they didn't mistreat Yi Ying, but looking at Yi Ying's miserable appearance, anyone would think that she was really mistreated by the Li Palace. Concubine Xian Zhao snorted and said, "Mistreated?" Yi Ying tried to assassinate the prince. Her crime is punishable by death. Yi Li smiled and said, "Oh? Then Li Wang wanted to kill the emperor in court. What crime is that?" Chapter 926. Behind her, Qin Feng answered, "Exterminate the entire clan." Yi Li shook her head and smiled. The emperor and the imperial family are also part of King Li's clan. Exterminating the entire clan is impossible. However, exterminating the entire clan is inevitable, right? Yungu asked in confusion, "Didn't they say that King Li is Xiao Yun's father?" Yi Li smiled and patted Yun Ji's head. "That's right. Then it's confusing the imperial family's bloodline. King Li passed his son off as the late emperor's son. How should he be punished?" Xian Zhao Dowager Consort. Xian Zhao Dowager Consort was at a loss for words. How was this Mo Jingli passing off his son as the late emperor's son? It was clearly the late emperor who took away Mo Jingli's newborn son and passed him off as a prince to raise him. However, who would believe such words? The late emperor had quite a number of princes. Moreover, he passed the throne to this child in the end. After a long time of speechlessness, Xian Zhao Dowager Consort finally said coldly, "This is my Dechu state's matter. It seems to have nothing to do with Princess Ding." Yi Li was not in a hurry. She pointed at Yi Ying on the ground and said, "If this is my fourth sister's child, does Xian Zhao Dowager Consort still think it has nothing to do with me? Or does Xian Zhao Dowager Consort think that I and the Prince Ding mansion are easy to bully?" Sophistry. Xian Zhao Dowager Consort could not win against Yi Li in a war of words. She swung her sleeves and sat to the side without saying another word. Yi Li walked to Yi Ying's side and squatted down, asking softly, "How is it?" Yungu shook her head sadly. Yi Ying was hit by Mo Jingli's palm and her internal injuries were severe. Her meridians were broken, and after that, she fell down the stairs and aggravated her internal injuries. No matter how good the internal injury medicine was, it could only delay the time. Yi Ying leaned in Yun Ji's arms and reached out to Mo Suyun with difficulty. Seeing the bloodstains on her clothes and the traces of blood flowing from her lips, Mo Suyun was frightened and did not dare to go forward. Yi Li sighed and pulled Mo Suyun over. She whispered, "Suyun, go and take a look at her. She won't hurt you." Mo Suyun seemed to have an almost instinctive trust in Yi Li. He looked at Yi Li hesitantly before he finally walked slowly towards Yi Ying. Yi Ying looked at Mo Suyun with a smile, and sparkling tears kept falling from the corners of her eyes. "Suyun, it's all Mother's fault. If Mother hadn't been greedy, you wouldn't have fallen so ill. Ahem, from now on, be good and stay by your aunt's side. She will settle you down. In the future, you won't have to be so scared anymore. You have to live well, live well." Third sister. Yi Li walked up to her and sighed, "Why are you doing this?" Yi Ying smiled and said, "I'm not sad. Mo Jingli didn't want my Suyun. Then he shouldn't have any children in this life." The late emperor did a good deed. People like Mo Jingli deserve to die without any descendants. Third sister, I was ignorant back then, please, don't blame me. Please, take good care of Suyun. Yi Li was silent for a moment and nodded, "Don't worry, I will settle this child down. Mr. Shenyang is also in Glass City. He might be able to cure his body in the future." Yi Ying nodded and smiled with tears in her eyes. "Third sister, I've always known that you are a good person. I've always been jealous of you. Is it true that only good people can get happiness? I really envy you. In my next life, I'll be a good person too." Yi Li was speechless. In fact, compared to many people, the selfish and weak Yi Ying was really not a bad person. At least she had never really harmed anyone, although it might be because she didn't have the ability. "Yi Ying, you bitch, I'm going to kill you." As they were talking, Mo Jingli suddenly rushed out from inside. His ashen face was twisted and ferocious like an evil spirit. Mo Suyun, who was still being pulled by Yi Li to talk, was immediately frightened and threw himself into Yi Li's arms. Mo Jingli grabbed Yi Ying's clothes and tried to pull her up. Yun Gu, who had been ignored by the side, was instantly furious. Yun Ji's mood was not very good to begin with. She could not cure the first patient after leaving the mountain and could not save the second patient. However, this princely was actually dragging a dying person around like a sack in front of her. "Let go of me." In a fit of anger, Yungu unceremoniously slapped him. Mo Jingli realized that he was not a match for this little girl in front of him. He immediately used Ying to block in front of him without hesitation. Fortunately, Yungu had a peaceful nature. Even when she slapped him in anger, she did not use her full strength. She stared angrily at Mo Jingli in front of her. "Shameless. Bad guy. Bastard. Scum." Yi Li's mouth twitched. She silently thought about who was the one who taught Yungu bad things these days. Yi Ying did not care about her current situation. With a faint smile on her lips, she looked at Mo Jingli and smiled. "Prince, do you like the gift that Ying gave you? Bitch. Take out the antidote." Mo Jingli said coldly. Yi Ying struggled to pick up the knife in her other hand. She smiled. "The antidote. I ate the antidote. Prince, do you know how much effort I put in to get this medicine? I did not plan to let you use it so quickly, but I prepared it long ago. In Glass City. After knowing that you already got the antidote, I thought of a way to make this medicine. Since this morning, I have been soaking this dagger in the medicine. Then. Before I came in, I ate the antidote myself. Bitch, I'm going to kill you." Mo Jingli choked Yi Ying's neck tightly. He really underestimated Yi Ying, this bitch. She had actually started scheming so long ago. Yi Ying turned her head with some difficulty to look at Imo Jingli, who was hiding in Yi Li's arms. She raised the knife in her hand and stabbed at Imo Jingli. This stab was not meant to hurt him. It was meant to be an assassin. Imo Jingli shook Yi Ying off. Yi Ying did not care. She looked up at Imo Suyun. Suyun, leave this place with your aunt, otherwise he will kill you. Seeing more and more blood flowing from Yi Ying's lips, everyone was silent. They silently watched the woman lying in a pool of blood gradually lose her life. Mother. In the quiet palace, a weak child's voice suddenly sounded. Yungu, who was standing beside Yi Li, suddenly covered her eyes and cried silently. Yaoji, who was sitting beside Mu Yang, lowered her head and silently wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. Her bright eyes became more determined. Yi Li handed Imo Suyun to Wei Lin, who was behind her. She said lightly, Yungu, we should go back. Yungu silently sniffed. She walked over and held Yi Li's clothes and followed her out. I believe Prince Li will make good arrangements for fourth sister's body. Yi Li looked back at Imo Jingli and asked. Arrangements? Imo Jingli showed a strange and twisted smile. I want to burn her bones and scatter her ashes. Up to you. Yi Li did not have any thoughts of burying her. It would be good if they could bring Yi Ying's body out, but they had no way to do so now. This consort will help the prince publicize the great kindness of Princess Consort Li. I believe the people of Jiangnan will be grateful for Prince Li's kindness. Chapter 927. Yi Li, stop right there. Imo Jingli angrily roared, leave Imo Suyun behind for me. Don't even think about it. Before Yi Li could say anything, Yungu angrily said, Xiao Yun's mother has already entrusted him to Li Jijie. And if you didn't want to kill Xiao Yun, how could Princess Consort Li have died? He is the emperor of the Dechu state. Imo Jingli gritted his teeth. He might even be his only son from now on. Yi Ying's final attack had dealt a huge blow to Imo Jingli. He had been poisoned twice. The imperial physician had already said that even if the antidote was found, his chances of having children in the future were very slim. Yi Li turned around and calmly said, doesn't Li King want to get rid of this child and ascend the throne? Then in exchange, this consort will take this child away. From now on, he will no longer be a descendant of the Imo family. Just as Li King wished, Imo Suyun has passed away. No. Imo Jingli flatly refused. Yi Li did not care, then. Imo Suyun is still the emperor, but his birth mother entrusted him to this consort. Then this consort and the Prince Ding mansion must ensure that he lives up to his name as the emperor. In other words, the Prince Ding mansion would completely interfere with the politics of the Dechu state. Not to mention that Imo Jingli was absolutely unwilling to let the Prince Ding mansion interfere with the Dechu state. Even if he agreed, Imo Suyun was still in a daze. He was not truly stupid. If he was really stupid, he would not have called out "mother" earlier. When he grew up in the future, he would definitely not stand on Imo Jingli's side as his father. Yi Li looked at him and said, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Li King had best consider this carefully. Imo Jingli darkly said, what if I insist that all of you stay? Yi Li smiled faintly and said, that will depend on whether King Li has the ability or not. Even if King Li wants to keep all of us here, it would be best to ensure that no one else will spread the news of what happened tonight. Prince Li killed his son and the emperor, and the princess consort sacrificed herself for the greater good. What a good show. Imo Jingli was already heavily injured, and now that he was so anxious that his vision turned black, he almost fell to the ground. The people next to him hurriedly helped him to a chair. Imo Jingli held onto the armrest and forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart. He took a deep breath and stared at Yi Li. He said in a deep voice, Yi Li, good job. Not as good as Prince Li, Yi Li retorted calmly. The virtuous consort looked at Imo Jingli's exhausted appearance and hurriedly said, Princess Ding, put down the emperor. I promise you all will leave Jiangnan safely. On the side, Qin Feng gave a disdainful laugh and said, "Do we need your promise? Nanjing is just a place where we can come and go as we please. What can you do to us?" The virtuous consort's face darkened. Yi Li spoke first and leisurely said, "I have always kept my word. Since I promised fourth sister to take care of the child, I must take the child away. Virtuous consort, you can try to see if it is better for us to leave quietly or for us to kill our way out of the Li Palace. With just the few of you." The virtuous consort sneered. Yi Li smiled and said, "Do you have a lot of people?" Virtuous consort, why don't you try to summon the guards to see? The virtuous consort didn't speak. Yi Li dared to say this because there probably weren't many guards in the Li Palace that could move. "Prince Li, what do you think?" Yi Li asked. "Get out!" Mo Jingli finally roared. Yi Li didn't care about what he said. She waved her hand and led everyone out in broad daylight. In the main hall, the atmosphere was so solemn and silent that one could hear a pin drop clearly. Everyone looked down and could only hear the thumping of their hearts. Mo Jingli sat in the main hall, gasping for breath. His eyes were as ferocious as a beast that chose people to devour. They had originally planned to compliment their future master, but the grand banquet had turned into a melodramatic, bloody, and tragic drama of the royal family's ethics. How could the people sitting here not be scared witless? They could only secretly rejoice in their hearts. At least there were so many of them. The prince wouldn't kill all of them, right? The so-called law can't punish the masses, there was some truth to it. Reporting to the prince, Princess Ding and her people disappeared shortly after leaving the palace. After a long time, someone outside the door reported, "A bunch of trash. Get out of here. I want all of you to get out. Get out." Mo Jingli roared. If everyone didn't leave now, when would they leave? They quickly got up and said goodbye to Mo Jingli and Xian Zhao old concubine and hurried out. Leer. Xian Zhao old concubine glanced at Mo Jingli and called softly, "Get out! Get out!" Mo Jingli didn't look at the people in front of him and scolded angrily. In the small courtyard where Yi Li and others were temporarily staying, Su Qingchen looked at the child in Wei Lin's arms and raised her eyebrows. "Mo Jingli saw through your identity?" Yi Li helplessly smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. He doesn't have the time to do anything to us now. But big brother, the things in Nanjing are almost done. We should go back." Although Mo Jingli might not dare to do anything to them for the time being, it was inevitable that they would provoke him if they stayed in the city for too long. Maybe Mo Jingli would impulsively fight to the death. Mo Jingli doesn't seem to be that kind of impulsive person. Su Qingchen said. It was not that Mo Jingli's character was calm, but Mo Jingli was too attached to those flashy power. It was hard for people who were attached to their loved ones to be reckless when they did things. It's very likely that he has won now. Any man who was unlucky like Mo Jingli would probably do whatever it took. If he didn't get it in the beginning, it would be fine. But now his poison had been cured, and he obviously had another child. In the blink of an eye, the child was gone and he was poisoned. In the future, his only hope was probably broken. It had to be said that Yi Ying's last incident really made people look at her with admiration. Su Qingchen sighed softly and glanced at Mo Suyun who was lying motionless in Wei Lin's arms. Yi Ying is dead. What are you going to do with this child? After all, he is the emperor of Dechu State. It is not appropriate to raise him in the Prince Ding mansion. Yi Li said, Yi Ying wants us to send the child back to my father. After all, he is their grandson. There is the Prince Ding mansion in Glass City to take care of him. The child should be fine. In any case, it is better than staying in Nanjing as a puppet emperor. Su Qingchen nodded and said, well, you can go north tomorrow morning. Hearing this, Yi Li was stunned. Big brother, do you still have something to do? Su Qingchen said, I still have to help Yungu find someone. Yi Li frowned and thought for a while. If you want to find someone, can't Big Brother just tell me? Is it difficult to find them? Su Qingchen shook his head and smiled. It's not difficult to find them. I know where they live. But I have to take Yungu there. Yili looked at Su Qingchen awkwardly and said, why don't we wait for 2 days and go back with Big Brother? Yili was really worried about letting Su Qingchen take Yungu and stay in Nanjing City. Su Qingchen did not have the strength to truss a chicken. Yun Ji's martial arts were not weak, but she was a little girl without any experience. What if something happened to Big Brother? Chapter 928. Looking at Yi Li's undisguised worry, Su Qingchen smiled helplessly. Li, this is really just an accident. Prince Ding must be waiting anxiously. You'd better go back quickly. Otherwise, he will complain that I'm not capable enough to keep you in Jiangnan for so long. Yi Li was determined to ignore Su Qingchen. I'll stay for 1 more day. Anyway, there are still some things to deal with. I'm not in a hurry. Unable to persuade Yi Li, Su Qingchen could only plan to take Yungu to find her tomorrow morning. Yi Li was worried about him staying in Nanjing alone. How could he not be worried about Yi Li's safety? In the end, Nanjing was not their territory. Princess. Master Qingchen, Miss Yungu and the girl in the backyard are fighting. A guard flew in and reported with a worried face. Yi Li and Su Qingchen were both stunned. Su Qingchen immediately stood up. Yi Li was not very worried. Not to mention that Dongfang Yu's internal energy was restrained. Even if Yungu was fine, she might not be at a disadvantage. Dongfang Yu's internal energy is gone. How can she still make a fuss? Yi Li asked curiously. The guard frowned and said, Princess, they didn't use martial arts. How can they fight without martial arts? Princess, you'll know when you see it. The guard said. Martial arts was not the only way to fight. Because most people in the world did not know martial arts, it did not mean that they did not fight. Therefore, when Yi Li and Su Qingchen saw the 2 people fighting on the ground in the courtyard, they could not help but be stunned. Su Qingchen could not help but touch his forehead and called out, Yungu. Hearing Su Qingchen's voice, Yungu paused. But this pause was enough for Dongfang Yu to grab her beautiful face. If he grabbed her face, even if Dongfang Yu did not have internal energy, Yun Ji's beautiful face would be disfigured for several months. However, although Dongfang Yu did not have any internal energy at the moment, it did not mean that Yungu did not either. So she just tilted her head back and clasped Dongfang Yu's claws tightly with one hand. Don't fight, okay? Dongfang Yu sneered, go to hell. With a bitter face, Yungu blocked Dongfang Yu's hand that was waving at her again. She quickly sealed her acupoints and jumped up from the ground, running to Su Qingchen. Su Qingchen, Sister Li, why are you here? Yi Li raised her eyebrows at her, smiling without saying a word. Su Qingchen looked at her. Who told you to fight with someone? Although Su Qingchen's voice was as gentle as ever, Yungu felt an inexplicable chill run down his spine. She couldn't help but shrink her neck and move closer to Yi Li. She felt that Su Qingchen, who was looking at her indifferently, was fiercer than her father, who had passed away 3 or 4 years ago. Therefore, it was not unreasonable for the brothers of the Su family to be afraid of eldest young Master Su. Eldest young Master Su was born with the dignity of a teacher. I was wrong. Yungu lowered her head and admitted her mistake. Yi Li looked at the 2 with a smile, and then looked at Dongfang Yu who was fixed on one side. She smiled faintly and said, why did Yungu come here? This yard was the innermost and most remote yard in the mansion. Ordinary people would not come here for no reason. Yungu said with a bitter face, I just wanted to pick a few flowers for little Yun. It turned out that there were 2 begonias in the yard where Dongfang Yu lived. Yungu thought that Imo Suyun had been frightened and his mind was somewhat blank. Perhaps it would be better to give him some fun things. But the little girl who grew up in the mountains did not know what to give. Her first choice was naturally flowers and plants. So she ran all over the mansion and found these 2 begonias that were blooming well. But she did not want to disturb Dongfang Yu, who was under house arrest in the yard. And Dongfang Yu had heard the people in the mansion mention this girl that young Master Qingchen had brought back personally. So they started to fight as soon as they met. If Dongfang Yu's internal energy had not been restrained, she might have used her killing move directly. Su Qingchen handed over a white handkerchief and said, "Don't you know martial arts? Do you need to roll around on the ground with people?" Yungu lowered her head and drew circles on the ground with her feet. She thought that Dongfang Yu did not know martial arts. People who practiced martial arts naturally could not bully ordinary people who did not know martial arts. After seeing Su Qingchen, Dongfang Yu no longer stared at Yungu with her eyes. Instead, she looked at Su Qingchen with infatuation. Ever since she was caught by Yili, she had not seen Su Qingchen even once. Although Yili did not lock her up in the dungeon, as long as she wanted to take a step out of the courtyard, she would immediately be stopped. And these people did not use any tricks. Even when she shouted that she wanted to burn the house, they did not even turn their eyes. The meaning was obvious. If she wanted to burn herself to death, she could do so. Of course, Dongfang Yu did not want to burn herself to death, so she could only endure silently. Today, she finally saw Su Qingchen in person. Dongfang Yu was not in the mood to argue with Yungu. Yungu looked curiously at Su Qingchen and then at Dongfang Yu. She could not help but move closer to Yili. She felt that the way this woman looked at Su Qingchen was very strange. It made her hair stand on end. "Master Qingchen, how are you?" Dongfang Yu asked softly. She did not care that her acupoints were sealed and her body was stiff. It was hard for people to get used to saying such tender words. Su Qingchen looked indifferently at Dongfang Yu, then turned her gaze to Yungu, who was beside Yili, and said, "Why aren't you going back to change?" Then, copy the essay I taught you yesterday 10 times and give it to me tomorrow morning. Ah! Yun Ji's face fell. Su Qingchen, I don't, 15 chapters. Su Qingchen said indifferently. Yungu stared blankly at Su Qingchen. She opened her mouth and finally said, "I'll go right now." She looked carefully at Su Qingchen. She probably felt that Su Qingchen was not in a good mood. Yungu asked in a low voice, "Can I plant a few flowers before I go?" Su Qingchen nodded. Yungu then flew up to a branch and planted a few flowers. She ran out quickly, as if Su Qingchen would add 10 or 20 more times if she stayed. Looking at her departing figure, Yili couldn't help but smile and said, "Big brother, you're too strict with Yunj. Look at how scared she is. Yungu is your savior after all." Su Qingchen glanced indifferently at Yili. She is not young. She has lived alone in the mountains. When her father was alive, he did not teach her many things that should have been taught. Yili suddenly understood. She nodded and said, "That's right. 15 years old is not young. It's time for her to get married. If she comes back with us, please teach her well, auntie." Su Qingchen did not comment. She said indifferently, "I'm afraid she won't go with us." At that time, a rich and powerful family, Yungu, who grew up in the countryside, would be eaten up by others. Yili said with a smile, "Big brother must have a way to let her go back with us." Chapter 929. Su Qingchen didn't seem to hear her. She turned and walked out of the door. Yili glanced coldly at Dongfang Yu, who was sitting on the ground, and said, "Miss Dongfang, after being a prisoner, you still don't know what it means to know your place." Dongfang Yu finally stopped staring at Su Qingchen's back. She stared at Yili angrily and said, "Who is that girl?" Yili raised her eyebrows and smiled, "If Miss Dongfang doesn't know who Yunj is, why would you fight with her?" Dongfang Yu screamed, "That's impossible. How can that wild girl who doesn't know anything be worthy of young Master Qingchen? You lied to me. Yi Li, how did I offend you? Why do you have to break me up with young Master Qingchen? Yi Li looked up and rolled her eyes. Dongfang, you was crazy. Miss Dongfang, what do you mean I want to break you up with young Master Qingchen? Did my brother even look at you? Yi Li suddenly felt that she had been wronged. She was a good sister who cared about her big brother's lifelong happiness. She was definitely not picky. She was the best sister-in-law in the world. It must be you. Otherwise, young Master Qingchen wouldn't dislike me. Dongfang, you said angrily. Miss Dongfang, you think too much. Yi Li said calmly, look at how big brother treats Yunj, and then look at how big brother treats you. Don't you know what kind of girl he likes? Dongfang, you glared fiercely at Yi Li. Yi Li blinked her eyes and smiled faintly. Miss Dongfang, if I were you, I would rather think about how many days I have left than think about all this nonsense. You want to kill me? Dongfang, you looked at her coldly and said disdainfully. Yi Li shook her head and said, I don't plan to kill you. In fact, I plan to let you go. You think I'll believe you? Dongfang, you sneered. Yi Li said sincerely, it's true. I plan to let you go. And I'll send you back to your original subordinates in the Boundless Mountain. Along with the evidence of you murdering Dongfang Hui. Hearing Yi Li's words, Dongfang Yu's face instantly turned pale. Murdering Dongfang Hui was the only thing she had done in her life that she couldn't escape condemnation. At the same time, it was also something that would definitely cost her her life if word got out. While not even a tenth of Infinite Boundless Mountain's power remained, there were still quite a few people who were loyal to Infinite Boundless Mountain. These people were loyal to her, because she was the young master of the Boundless Mountain, to be the successor to Dongfang Hui. Once people found out that she was the one who killed Dongfang Hui, those people would immediately turn against her to avenge Dongfang Hui. Dongfang Yu still had self-awareness. How could his mere few months compare to Dongfang Hui's decades of prestige? Looking at Dongfang Yu's bleak expression, Yi Li did not have the slightest bit of sympathy for her. To her, Dongfang Hui was an enemy. But to Dongfang Yu, Dongfang Hui was her master, her mother, and her savior. If it weren't for Dongfang Hui, Dongfang Yu would have died long ago. She wouldn't have boasted that she was proficient in the 4 arts, martial arts, and medicine. She was the only one in the world who was worthy of young Master Qingchen. Even if Dongfang Hui had wronged everyone in the world, she hadn't wronged Dongfang Yu. She betrayed her master and even sent people to assassinate Dongfang Hui just because Dongfang Hui stood in her way. She was no different from a beast. Su Qingchen didn't like her. Even if Su Qingchen liked her, he would kill her. Of course, young Master Qingchen's vision was much sharper than Yi Li's. Originally, Yi Li hadn't thought of how to deal with Dongfang Yu. There was no point in keeping such a person alive. It just so happened that many hidden powers of the Boundless Mountain were hard to find. Once Yi Li released the truth of Dongfang Hui's murder, there were immediately people who were loyal to Dongfang Hui, disloyal to Dongfang Yu, and secretly ambitious people who wanted to form their own power. Therefore, Yi Li naturally didn't object to using Dongfang Yu in exchange for some benefits. Of course, this had to ensure that Dongfang Yu didn't survive. Dongfang Yu's obsession with Su Qingchen had long been twisted. If she escaped, Yi Li couldn't guarantee what she would do. Because they planned to go north as soon as possible, Su Qingchen didn't delay any longer. The next morning, he brought Yungu to the house of Marquis Muyang. Hearing the news of young Master Qingchen's visit, Muyang and his father's faces turned ugly. If it was in the past, they would naturally welcome young Master Qingchen's visit. But now, Prince Li had just been screwed over by the Prince Ding mansion. Of course, this wasn't the fault of the Prince Ding mansion. But no one in power wouldn't be angry. At this time, although Prince Li didn't send people to do anything to Princess Ding and young Master Qingchen, it was because he didn't have the confidence to catch them all. It wasn't that he didn't want to. Now that they were too close to young Master Qingchen, weren't they rushing to let Prince Li vent his anger? However, young Master Qingchen was not someone who they could ignore whenever they wanted to see him. With Su Qingchen's fame and status, you might not be able to see him when you wanted to. But when he wanted to see you, you definitely couldn't refuse to see him. Young Master Qingchen came from afar. This old man didn't welcome you properly. It was really rude of me. Old Marquis Muyang led Muyang and the Mu family to welcome Su Qingchen with a face full of smiles. Su Qingchen glanced at the group of people behind Marquis Muyang with a faint smile. It was said that Marquis Muyang was Mo Jingqi's confidant. Now that Mo Jingqi's reputation had fallen and his family was ruined, but Marquis Muyang's family was still prosperous and even more powerful than before. He was indeed a rare person among the generals who knew how to monopolize. Frowning slightly, Su Qingchen glanced at Yungu. Was it really a good thing to leave Yungu in the house of Marquis Muyang? Even if Yaoji was here, Yaoji had a heavy responsibility. How could she have the time to take care of an ignorant child? Besides, how long could the house of Marquis Muyang last? Yungu followed beside Su Qingchen and looked strangely at the old man who was talking to Su Qingchen. Since he felt that he didn't welcome them properly, why didn't he just go out to welcome them? Even if he was older, it didn't matter if he didn't welcome them. Yungu frowned. She didn't know why, but intuitively, she didn't like this old man who was smiling amiably at Su Qingchen. Old Marquis Muyang naturally also saw the young girl standing beside Su Qingchen. He felt it was strange. Young Master Qingchen was famous for being disrespectful to women. He was already over the age of 30 but hadn't gotten married. Why would he be with a beautiful young girl? Muyang and Yaoji naturally met Yungu before. Yaoji had a good impression of this young girl who was skilled in martial arts and nodded at her with a smile. Yungu blinked her eyes and smiled sweetly at Yaoji. Although Yungu hated those people at the banquet last night, she didn't hold a grudge. Besides, what happened last night had nothing to do with them. It was all that heartless Prince Li's fault. Yaoji, do you know this young girl? Marquis Muyang's wife, who was standing behind Muyang and beside Yaoji, suddenly asked in a sharp voice. Old Marquis Muyang frowned. He was very dissatisfied with his daughter-in-law's rude behavior, but he also glanced at Yaoji. Muyang glared at his wife and made an excuse. Father, I saw this young girl at Prince Li's mansion last night. Prince Li's mansion? Old Marquis Muyang frowned. What happened at Prince Li's mansion last night? Muyang only said a few words vaguely. As an official, he naturally needed to understand that some things could be said, and some things could not be said even to the people closest to him. Old Marquis Muyang didn't know what happened at Prince Li's mansion last night, but from the news of the Emperor's critical condition and Princess Consort Li's death this morning, it was probably not a small matter. Old Marquis Muyang glanced at Su Qingchen vigilantly and said in a deep voice, May I know why young Master Qingchen is here? Su Qingchen smiled faintly. Marquis Muyang, are you going to talk to me here? If possible, old Marquis Muyang really wanted to talk here. But at the same time, he also understood that this was not the place to talk. He smiled awkwardly and turned to the side. Young master, please come in. After entering the hall and taking a seat, Yungu sat obediently next to Su Qingchen. She was so quiet and well-behaved that one couldn't tell that she was the innocent and lively girl who was filled with righteous indignation over someone else's matter last night. After the tea was served, Muyang asked, Young Master Qingchen, may I know who this young girl is? Su Qingchen put down the teacup and glanced at Yungu, saying indifferently, May I know if Marquis Muyang remembers a doctor called Shen Fengru? Shen Fengru? Muyang frowned in confusion and looked at his parents. Old Marquis Muyang's expression changed slightly. He quickly glanced at Yungu who was sitting beside Su Qingchen and said in a deep voice, This old man has never heard of him. May I know why young Master Qingchen is asking about this? Su Qingchen said, Then, about 3 to 4 years ago, Marquis Muyang should not have received a single letter from this Mr. Shen. Old Marquis Muyang's expression had returned to normal. He nodded and said, This old man has indeed not received any letters. If that's the case, this one will take his leave. Su Qingshan's expression darkened and did not say anything else. He stood up and said to Yungu, let's go. Yungu looked at Su Qingshan in confusion. She did not understand why he was suddenly unhappy. However, if Su Qingshan was unhappy, she would usually be the unlucky one. So she quickly stood up and walked to Su Qingshan's side. She hesitated for a moment before asking, but, didn't you say you would help me find someone? Is it because you can't find him? It's okay, there's no need to rush. Su Qingshan smiled faintly and looked at Yungu, saying, there's no need to find him. The person your father arranged can't come and pick you up. Why? Yungu did not understand. Their entire family is already dead. Su Qingshan walked out without looking back. He completely did not see old Marquis Muyang's expression turn ugly as if he had swallowed a fly. She had never seen Su Qingshan so rude. Yungu nodded apologetically at Marquis Muyang, who was so angry that his face turned green. She quickly chased after him, Su Qingshan, don't be angry. It's not their fault that they died early. I can do it by myself. Don't worry. You'll come with me to Glass City in the future. Are you afraid that the Prince Ding mansion can't support a little girl like you? Su Qingshan's voice came faintly with a hint of joy. I'm not a little girl. Then, do I have to go visit the grave? It's just that, my father said that for the next 3 years, I have to visit his grave every year on the anniversary of his death. Otherwise, he'll be angry. There's no need. Wait until they're all dead. Su Qingshan said faintly. But, didn't you say that they're all dead? Yungu glared at him angrily. I said there's no need. Do you understand? Su Qingshan stopped and looked at Yungu with a gentle smile. Yungu immediately shrunk her head. She lowered her head and said softly, I understand. Su Qingshan was getting fiercer. Sob, you're tuning into the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.